session. Um, Good morning. It's so good to see you all. It's so good to be together today. Welcome to the sixth annual Ecological Justice and Social Work Symposium. My name is Renee Rawcliffe, and I am so honored to serve as one of your co-chairs for today's event. It's an absolute honor and privilege to welcome you all into this virtual space today as we gather to explore the intersections of our environment, communities, and our profession. So this symposium was sort of born in 2020, in the peak of the pandemic, really, and it was out of a shared vision of bringing community together to address the challenges, the really urgent challenges at the intersection of social work and the environment. So what began as a smaller collaborative effort has now really grown into this annual beautiful meeting space where we aim to bridge the gap between policy intent and the lived reality, centering anti-oppressive practice and ecological justice in everything that we do. So before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the land from which we are virtually connecting. Adelphi University's Garden City campus is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Matinecock, Merrick, and Rockaway Nations. We honor the Indigenous peoples who have been the original stewards of this land for generations and recognize the ongoing impact of colonialism. As we discuss ecological justice today, we do so with a commitment to centering Indigenous sovereignty and traditional ecological knowledge in our pursuit of a more equitable future. So at this time, I'd like to allow my fellow co-chairs to introduce themselves as well. Kelly?
Thank you, Renee, and thank you everyone for being here together. I'm Kelly Smith. I'm the founder and director of the ISWEJ, the Institute for Social Work and Ecological Justice. I'm truly so pleased to have you here with us this morning. And as Renee mentioned, the idea for the conference began now a long time ago, right? I was in graduate school, and I'm grateful for this continued collaboration with Adelphi University and especially Renee, her amazing staff at the Department of Continuing Education and Professional Development in the School of Social Work. And here we are 6 years later. And so I'm really proud of the fact that we've been able to continue to build this community for all of that time. And thank you so much. Georgiana?
Thank you. As was shared by my colleagues, I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. My name is Georgiana Dillon Riley. I'm the Outreach and Advocacy Manager of the ISWEJ. Hope that was the right acronym because there's a lot of I acronyms in this world. I did it correctly for a morning. Excellent. Just really full of gratitude as a group and community practitioner doing ecosocial work to just be in this space with folks at this really divisive time. So I look forward to this kind of collaborative space that we'll create together and the continued community that will come out of it, hopefully.
Thank you so much. I'm just sending my dean a link for right now. She's having trouble logging in, so give me 1 second. Thank you so much, Georgiana. I appreciate you and Kelly both, the collaboration that has been built on this shared vision of building community and bridging, again, ecological justice and social work. It's been such an honor and a privilege to work with both of you and all of you. We have folks in the room who have been with us since the very beginning, so welcome back. We also have folks that are here for the first time, and you might have said, I'm not really sure what I'm signing up for today, but I'm here. We are so glad you're here. We're so glad. And at the very least, what we do know for absolute certain is that every single one of you are going to leave today with some new knowledge, some new understanding, some new perspective. You might not leave today and say, ecological justice and social work is now my jam, and I'm just going to talk about this all of the time. No, that might not be it, but we do know for sure that this is going to inform an understanding, a lens, a conversation, a consideration as you move forward, and whether it's your practice, your research, your teaching, in whatever space you occupy on this land. So we're so super psyched and pumped to be together to be a part of that with you all. So we have an incredible lineup of speakers joining us today. We have folks who, like I mentioned, it's a blend of practitioners, social work practitioners, psychologists, academics, and researchers. When we had this vision quite a few years ago to do this, that's what we wanted. We knew we wanted to bridge all of these folks together. So we're so excited that there is a diversity of perspective. You're also hearing from some students today. We have doc students and we have undergrad students, again, from around the world. I'm not sure how many countries are represented here today. Maybe we can drop it in chat. If we know we've got a lot of folks here from the United States, but if you're from another part of the world, we'd love to know where that is as well. Um, the diversity of perspectives from those working on sort of the front lines as practitioners to those conducting scholarly research, it's essential for translating all the data that's out there into some actionable community-based solutions. So we know that to be true. Okay, so we're going to begin with a welcome from our dean, Dr. Joanne Corbin, the dean of Adelphi University School of Social Work. We'll move into a meditative welcome from Dr. Murali Nair, who will lead us in an opening meditation. And then we'll go into our keynote speaker this morning. We'll jump into some spark sessions, and then the afternoon we'll move into more 20-minute sessions that are going to cover various global perspectives and specialized topics. All of the information today, everything in terms of materials or biographies or references, has been included in your ecological justice and social work toolkit, which is basically a Google folder. But that is, I dropped it in chat earlier. You received it via email. We'll keep sharing it with you throughout today. There's so many resources for you to pile through. Again, if the slides were shared with us from presenters, we shared them with you. References were shared with you. We have a reference planning tool on there if you'd like to put your name on there because you want to collaborate with folks. We have additional resources that we think might be helpful for you in terms of your own practice and education. We have our posters that are also being presented today. What else do we have in there, my fellow co-chairs? We have the link to today's community music playlist. Anything I'm missing?
Did you mention the opportunities to engage in research?
Yes, and there's an opportunities to engage in research little folder in there. There's a couple of opportunities to connect with folks who are doing research around ecological justice and social work. I happen to be one of them. As a plug, I'll put it in there. It's in that folder. So you can feel free to jump in there. And if you meet any of those requirements, I urge you to reach out to those researchers. So the work today being shared today is more than just academic. It really is a call to action. As we often say, social work is political, and our role in ecological justice is absolutely fundamental, a fundamental part of that responsibility. So thank you for being here to learn, to grow, and to advocate alongside us. So at this time, I would like to introduce our dean here at Adelphi University School of Social Work, Joanne Corbin, who will share a few brief words with us. Dean Corbin, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to find you so I can highlight you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Renee, for that introduction. It's exciting, and I'm sorry I won't be able to stay for the whole day to hear all of those wonderful events. But it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the symposium, to the 6th Annual Ecological Justice and Social Work Symposium this morning. This topic for this year's symposium is timely and urgent. It is necessary that we take time today to reflect on the weight of the political, economic, social, technological, and health-related experiences and changes that are occurring at all levels of the social ecological system. And these are affecting us all in different ways all across the world. These experiences lead to fatigue, grief, and moral distress. The presenters today will provide an understanding of these issues across the system levels and share interventions that we can do individually and collectively to address these pressures. I especially like that the focus of today is not thinking about these issues as individual issues, but looking at them as macro and meso and exo levels across the systems. I wish to thank the collaboration between the Adelphi School of Social Work Continuing Education and Professional Education Department and the Institute for Social Work and Ecological Justice. I especially want to thank all of those involved in developing and putting on the symposium, and especially the work of Renee Rawcliffe and Erin Girato. On that note, I will stop and I will wish you all a productive day and one that is filled with self-care. Enjoy the symposium.
Thank you so much, Dean Corbin. We really are very excited to have you here with us, at least for the beginning. We know you have quite the busy schedule. And we appreciate also the ways in which you're supporting the real foundation of ecological justice and social work and really leading in this space. So thank you. It's now my pleasure to welcome once again Dr. Murali Nair from Columbia University. Dr. Nair is very important to me. He serves as my mentor for so many years and really was one of the reasons I was able to work in this space, encouraging me from the very beginning when I needed it most. And I'm grateful for now the 6th year in a row, Murali, that you're here with us. You have such an esteemed career advancing social and environmental justice through many mediums, including writing, film, documentary production, and always focusing in on well-being initiatives and innovations. Truly, the practices that you teach us each year stay with us. Renee and I and Georgiana, we often hearken back to the joy that you bring us in these meditations, and really centering that is so important and has carried through. This work matters so much, and for the 6th year in a row, I'm very grateful to welcome you once again.
Thank you all, and I can guarantee that this is going to be a very productive symposium. And Renee, you looked exactly the same 6 years ago, and keep up the good work. What I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes and think of today, the present, and I want you to take 3 deep breaths. And each time when you breathe in, and think of a number 1, 2, 3, nothing else, and empty your mind. And take a deep breath, then hold it counting 6, then slowly exhale counting 6, get rid of all your carbon dioxide from your system, and then pause counting 3, give a break for your lung. Then repeat it 2 more times, counting 3, pause counting 6, exhale counting 6, and all the time make sure you have a smiley face and keep your eyes closed. After the 3rd deep breath, just open your eyes and be present. It really works. I teach a course on mindfulness at Columbia University School of Social Work, and I know it works. And I have been practicing this for a long, long time. And take care of your body and mind. And keep in mind that you got only one body and one mind. And I think, you should take care of yourself. Sometimes we forget because we get involved with our issues in general. That is good for us also. But make sure you take care of yourself. And think of present moment. That is very, 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 very important. I just want to tell you one happy ending. And I live across the street from a park in Southern California. And we were able to open a meditation garden inside our park. This is owned by the county. This is the first time I was able to convince them that along with the physical, we need mental energy also, and they opened a meditation garden. And if you ever visit near Hollywood, let me know. I'll be glad to walk you through. And it's a beautiful experience out there. And there are all kinds of things out there about mindfulness. And my humble suggestion is take care of your body and mind. And I send out a good morning message since COVID started. If any of you would like to subscribe, and Colombia is sending it out every day in the morning. And my email is there on the website, and you are more than chat room, and you are more than welcome to connect with me. I wish you all the best, and Kelly, keep going with your good work. Thank you very much. Okay, bye bye.
Raleigh, thank you. It's essential, and it's like finding the joy now and centering the joy. It matters so much in these hard times, and you always manage to bring us back. And I would love to see your meditation garden, and thank you for bringing that to the wider community. Always finding a new way. Thank you.
So sorry, I got
Next, I'd like to welcome back Georgiana to introduce our keynote speaker.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Malari, for that. It's so important to kind of ground ourselves when we're doing this work. And I always am one that always forgets to do that. So for being reminded of these small little moments is so essential. My internet is saying that it is slightly unstable, so hopefully I am clear to all of you. I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker today. Dr. Smitha Rao works at the intersection of environmental justice, sustainable development, and policy from an international perspective. And her work is informed by her interdisciplinary background in social work and human geography. So I'm excited to have her here today. She is a wealth of information in the environmental justice and ecosocial work realm. So I'm just really pleased to hear about her work, and I'm sure she'll carry on many of the themes that we've already discussed today.
Thanks, Georgiana. I'm going to share my slides. I'm also having an unstable connection, so let's hope. All right. All right.
No, let me go back to this. So well, it's later than it seems. The shadows long and dark. The party's almost over now, and something else is about to start. The circus tent is folding up, ice is melting in the glass. The drunken host, he's made a toast. He wants to make this party last. But now a dark new day is dawning as things edge closer to the brink. Well, it's early in the morning, but it's later than you think. Well, I cry into the river as I sing my mournful songs. I see through the smoke and mirrors, but still I find myself alone. Hear the ticking of the clock, see the sand move through the glass. The church bells chime, a canary dies, and a light starts fading fast. As a dark new day is dawning and things move closer to the brink. Well, it's early in the morning, but it's later than you think. Yes, it's early in the morning.
Hi, everyone. Renee, can we go to the slideshow button over here? Thank you. Yeah. Can we go to the next slide, please? We can skip. Yeah. Thank you. This is a song by singer, songwriter, animal rights activist, environmental activist Grant Peoples. I first heard this song as a new social worker, as an environmental professional, as an advocate. I think the year was 2009 or so, nearly 17 years ago. And this gentleman wrote in to my boss then, saying that he's written a new song about climate change and wanting to get people to act. Um, and it's just one of those songs that I still find myself humming, and I don't know why it's not more popular. I know it's not the most cheerful of songs sometimes. It's later than you think. We were talking about this back in 2009. But I remember receiving this song and we were all energized and ready, all in on the fight for climate justice. And it just felt so energizing back then. And I've shared this song with Renee, Kelly, Georgiana, and all the organizers to add to the collective playlist, which I think is such a phenomenal idea. I'm looking forward to getting that list as well. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is not going to be a researchy presentation. I do plenty of those, and I'll be happy to talk about my research, but I'm drawing on a lot of my work today just to respond to the themes, right? So let's name this feeling, the shared feeling that the world transformation fatigue refers to, that many of us might be feeling for many reasons right now. The sense of unease that we have come to recognize only too well. And it's also not new, right? We have sort of learned to work with it. The feelings of existential dread is actually been the norm among many of my community of activists, organizers, professionals, academics, especially those working in the environmental and climate justice space, but also other spaces that are allied. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is probably the last of the memes I'm sharing today, because this existential dread or anxiety is not, like I said, just limited to the climate crisis. We are worried about climate impacts directly as well as indirectly. And I hear from friends every day that they are tired and sad and still processing the impacts of X, Y, or Z that happened and seeing the next disaster unfold and take place and form as we speak. And that disaster can be social or otherwise. We're also tired of seeing the warnings fall on unlistening ears, sometimes unwilling ears. No, that's the right slide. It's fine, Renee. We went back a bit. Yeah, that's fine. Yep. We're also tired of wars fought in our name, genocide being conducted on our dime that, in fact, make the climate crisis worse
social work, environmental, and
or negate all the efforts that we have been taking to address it and the immense toll on life itself.
the world is anxious. Yeah.
We can go to the next slide now. Okay, so these are converging crises and they are tiring. This poly crisis that climate change is and all the other stuff named and unnamed, I have a few here, but I'm sure this group can name a lot of other crises. I already see that polarization that was mentioned is not here. That is connected. I would love for you to drop things that you don't see here that are related to the climate justice, ecological justice, and whatever you're working on into this, that really show us that these struggles are interconnected. So what are those other interlocked crises that come to mind when you think about climate change and ecological justice issues, or whatever you're currently working on? And this poly crisis that we are facing today demands that we reevaluate our actions constantly. What's worked in the past might not be effective anymore today. And that's something that we talk a lot in the climate space when we're talking to communities that, what worked in the past might not work today because things are changing so rapidly. And that's a lesson that we can learn in our own work, in our own everyday work. We can go to the next slide. We are also worried about democracy and our basic rights sometimes being trampled upon. Communities' rights, long-standing rights, rights that were hard fought, being removed, community representation removed as recently as yesterday. I was just reading the news this morning. And when we lose our ability to protest, we lose so much more. And that picture is about the 2024 elections. Remember when they were meant to be the climate elections? Um, that's that's just one way of showing how all of these different crises are interconnected and compounding. And really, it's not ever one crisis that we are facing or looking at. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, I'm seeing some chats show up. Disability justice, absolutely. It absolutely is part of that poly crisis. Now, this is something that, again, just needing to be named, and this is just an example from the US, and I'd invite folks to talk about what's happening in different countries. When we seem to have enough money, resources, and political will to fund wars, or right now in the context of the US, vanity projects, ballroom-shaped vanity projects, but not enough to ensure that a family has access to supplemental nutritional assistance, or that an older adult has the provision to meet someone regularly. That adds to the risk of social isolation. What does that mean in terms of our priorities? We can go to the next slide. This, I'm naming the obvious here, but these tensions need to be named. Our political and policy systems many times are sometimes the very sources of the disasters that we are trying to mitigate. I'm a disaster preparedness researcher, but that's not the disaster I'm talking about right now. For example, for very good reason, we champion voter engagement as a vital strategy to preserve and uphold our democracy. But as practitioners, we have to admit that our political systems very often fail to represent and or respond to the very people most at risk, the non-citizens, the undocumented, the incarcerated individuals who are already excluded from societies and also excluded from the ballot box. And that determines their every future, not just their climate future. And then there is this myth of the state being the protector, and abolitionist ecosocial work analysis, which we have done with some of the colleagues who may be present or presenting later on in the symposium, which reveals that the state often is the perpetrator of that injustice, especially to communities considered disposable. And we are absolutely seeing a particularly ghastly version that's playing out at multiple levels, at the global levels. And another reason why we need to name these tensions and say that, it's not ever just that one issue. And the final tension, I mean, there are many tensions. I just named three. There's the final tension that there is this performance of justice, right? When we see that institutions capitulate well in advance of oppressive policies. We have to wonder if all the inroads we made toward justice were real, or did they ever even believe in centering the community voices? And or was it just a performance because it was the currency of the day? And again, that's a trend that's worsening the world over right now, not just in the US where we are situated right now, but even back home where I'm from in India. Let's go to the next slide. Forward. Okay. So the problem with conventional hope, specifically on the climate crisis, for too long, for good reason, I'm not the most popular person at a party because this is what I'm talking about. Many people talk about how the climate movement needs messages of hope, right? That we focus too much on the doom and the gloom, and we are talking about all the things going wrong. And I agree, we do need to know about the successes. We need the optimism because that clearly resonates with more people. It might help draw more folks in. But we also know and have seen that that can sometimes be hurtful and not the complete truth. If you go to the next slide, there are two pictures, so you can click twice. Thank you. This is an example from, I think it was just after Hurricane Helene had hit North Carolina and many parts of the US in 2024, in the fall of 2024. And Anna Jane Joyner, who actually runs a very interesting group called Good Energy Stories, whose hometown was destroyed during Hurricane Helene, reminded everyone that a hurricane wiping out Asheville, which was hundreds of miles away from the coast, is not solvable by stories of hope and solar panels, right? And that we need to acknowledge the terror, the grief that communities felt, the despair, and then prepare ourselves, both emotionally and otherwise. Interesting story about Anna Jane Joyner is that this group that she's part of has a Bechdel-Wallace test for a world on fire, which is kind of like the Bechdel test, but for how climate change is talked about in popular media. It's just a small tidbit that I find interesting always to say that how is our real world, how is our fictional world showing what's a reality increasingly around the world. Can we go to the next slide again? And then there's the blatant gaslighting. This particular picture on the right is a rather egregious example that made quite the buzz in the climate environmental circles back in 2024. For context, Chevron is one of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world, one of the biggest polluters. Like many of those big giants, has played a huge role in the current climate crisis and also denying the climate crisis. And it's been accused of and found guilty of many environmental crimes in many parts of the world, including Ecuador and other places. So what happens is this gaslighting about, yes, we are doing something, coupled with the false sense of hope, sometimes in some of the stories that imply that we don't really need to change. And again, going back to the need for positive stories, I seek out positive stories every single day. And there certainly are some, and we need to be looking for those. But there's no need for coddling or not telling the whole story, right? We cannot gloss over inaction, or we cannot gloss over the connections to the biggest oppressive systems, because that stalls action and makes us think that we have time. And remember, it's later than we think. If you go to the next slide. Um, in the climate world, this hope, as you can see from the last few slides, is disputed, right? But it's also so needed. It is critical. For example, there is a concept of radical hope that rejects the optimistic kind of hope and suggestion that we may avoid the worst effects of the climate crisis while we continue to live the way we always have without radically altering our way of life, not just individually, but at a system level, at a community level. And obviously, there has been some pushback against that. So radical hope is one way. A newer idea that I came across, which I'm intrigued by, was a 2025 paper, which I've also linked to our references, is something called spontaneous hope, which looks at experiencing the world as full of transformative possibilities, a world where we have a hand in actualizing, changing ourselves. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. And it's also not just a one country problem. It is a global problem. The Frontline Defenders Global Analysis Report, I think it comes out around this time of the year, spring, early summer. This is from their 2024-25 report. It really every year examines the risks that human rights defenders around the world face. Hundreds are killed every year, hundreds, thousands are silenced. Their work is stopped. 2024, again, it was the year of the big elections around the world. Some of the biggest elections happened that year. And there was so much violence against human rights defenders, and that includes deaths, threats, legal actions, surveillance, crackdowns on peaceful protests and freedom of assembly, travel bans, harassment. Those are tactics that many of us in the US are seeing increasingly, but those are tactics that oppressive governments and states globally have always used. And these reports really do this urgent work of documenting, and it's likely not fully representative of all the state violence that has occurred because not everything is documented. As you can see, the percentage over here shows the 5 most targeted groups of human rights defenders by by area of human rights defense. And you can see those intersecting pieces showing up: environmental, human rights, LGBTQI rights, women's rights, and there's so much more. Each of these reports are a wealth of information. I highly encourage you to look at them. Crackdowns, like I said, just weeks back, in Eastern India, tribal communities faced off against the state, where they were opposing a large multinational conglomerates' plans to proceed with bauxite mining in their lands, which they say they never fully consented to. They will likely never see the benefit from, and hundreds were injured. And it's at a stalemate, but the government is going ahead with now introducing a rail line to that same land. Can we go to the next slide? All that is to say that that risk that many people face at an individual level is real, right? And it doesn't have to take on the extreme cases that we talked about, but there is real risk. And the truth is that not every form of resistance and advocacy or visible engagement is available to every person at every moment in their life. The visible forms of activism, marching, speaking out, putting your name on things, it really carries a real risk, especially right now. There's personal and professional risk, sometimes physical risk, as we saw. And I think it's important to remind yourself that you don't have to put yourself at risk if you cannot afford to do so. You don't have to do it in the way that you think it has to be done. But what's important is to find your way. Find a way that is meaningful and within your reach, and do that thing steadily, consistently, and change and shift with the community, in the community, and with others, in your own ways and in your own terms, in a way that you find real and meaningful. And the risk is uneven across your identities, across locations, both geographic and social locations. Can we go to the next slide? I love durable hope. Okay. I'm not looking at the chat actively. I look forward to seeing everything that folks are putting in. Um, so we may need a radical form of acceptance of what's happening right now to deal with these large-scale changes. Radical acceptance, some of you who are practitioners, who are clinical practitioners, may have heard about it from, I think, the CBT and dialectical behavior therapy world. I am a macro social worker, and I know this concept. I feel like this concept really resonates with the meditation practice that I have and many of us share. And it really means this willingness to share, to learn from observing without reacting. So that observing without reacting, to let go of that illusion of control that you have. And that is the lifelong practice that a lot of meditators do. So that radical acceptance, it is acceptance, but it never means resignation and defeat, right? It never means that's it, I'm done. This is my life now. It is just to give up that illusion of control and then reassess. So it's a strategic reassessment, so to speak, in light of new and ever-changing reality. That's the nature of life. Another idea actually that comes to mind along with this is the idea of embracing uncertainty. This is author activist Rebecca Solnit's coinage about knowing and realizing that we may not know right now what will happen, but it's always worth trying to do what we feel is right. And she also talks about, how change takes time. It just takes time and more time. And then when it actually happens, it happens quite suddenly. That's how movement victories have always been, big and small movement victories. Speaking of Ms. Solnit, and because we talked about how this conference and symposium started out in the pandemic times, I was thinking also of this pandemic time article that she wrote on the 10 ways to confront the climate crisis without losing hope. I go back to that often. I think I'm not going to rattle off all of those 10 ways, but one memorable one was how the future is not yet written and that we are writing it now. So I highly encourage you to look at that, go find that and go read it often because it holds up today. Next slide, please. And, burnout is not just individual, it can fail movements, right? And sustainability of yourself, taking care of yourself, as Dr. Nair said, is not a compromise. It means that you are actually stewarding yourself. And stewarding yourself is stewarding the work because the work depends on you. The movement needs people, and the movement needs all of us, and we cannot be everywhere all the time in all forms. So it's okay to pause. Next slide, please. I think this is a personal conversation that we all need to have with ourselves and with those in our circles, those who we work with. If the risk right now, any kind of risk, right? And it looks different for each individual, each community, where you are located. If the risk right now in your particular circumstances is too great, it is okay to take a step back from that specific path and reassess. That is not failure. That pulling back sometimes can be wise. It's certainly not giving up. And it is part of that risk management. That is what we talk about again as disaster researchers. You're assessing, reassessing, and making a plan. It may be the thing that actually keeps you in the work when a different choice would have led you out of it. So this work, reminding ourselves that this work needs people who are still standing in 5 years, in 10 years, maybe in a different shape and form and role, but it still needs people. Let's go to the next slide. This, I recently lost one of my closest mentors who I was not in touch with, on an everyday basis, just a yearly hello and check in. But it just made me go back and think about a lot of life's teachers. Many of them are here and who I've met along the way. And there are these moments in one's life that are very fleeting, but leave such a huge impression on you that you keep reaching back into that moment to remind yourself of what you learned and how it applies today to you right now. And I want to share the story, which actually is a story many times removed. It didn't happen to me, but it made such a deep impression on me as a, I don't know, 20-something-year-old new environmental practitioner and advocate. I was listening to Mr. Kumi Naidu, who's a very well-known human rights and climate activist from South Africa, who was coming in to lead the organization that I was part of back then. This was the big introduction to our new leader, who someone we were going to learn from and work with. We were a very flat organization. And again, I did not go into a history of my work, but I did not start out as an academic. So this was my world back in the day. I was a practitioner. I was a macro practitioner and an environmental activist and advocate. So Mr. Naidu shared that when he was a young activist and an organizer, during the South African apartheid era, fighting oppression, organizing protests in schools and boycotts against the apartheid, he had this conversation with a friend. And I'm going to try my best to remember it the way I remember. It happened in the middle of his conversation with a friend. And his friend asked him, so what do you think is the biggest contribution we can make to this cause, to justice? And Mr. Naidu replied, I don't know. I suppose I can give up my life. I will protest, I'll be killed, I'll be a martyr, because violence was very common in that time in South Africa. And his friend turned to him and said, that's the wrong answer. It's not about giving our life. It's about giving the rest of our lives to the cause. So it's the rest of our lives. Again, a fleeting moment, but such a simple and powerful idea that really helps reframe all that we are doing. There are heroes and advocates living for different causes. And, this is probably a reframe that helps me think about how, we are giving the rest of our lives to what we believe in whatever way we can. So framing it that way helps us understand that you have the rest of your life. So it's obvious that there will be stops and starts, moves and changes. There'll be detours, there'll be complete halts. There'll be, recognizing that it is within you to work towards this in whatever way you think you can. And that is crucial. And I'm just so thankful that I heard that story, and I'm sharing that with you in the spirit that if you've never met Mr. Naidu, he's a very inspiring speaker and activist. And it's just an inspiring story to hear and learn and keep in the back of your mind. because keeping on, for the rest of our lives, it's a skill. It can be learned, it can be taught, and it can be done better or worse. And a lot of our practitioners in the room, they do it well. They remain in the field, they're effective, they're whole, they're here for the long haul. Many of the folks who stay the long haul are not tougher than the rest of us. They've just figured out about the nature of this work, and something that many of us are still figuring it out and working it out. And it's a practice, like I said, it's an everyday practice. Can we go to the next slide? This is, something again to remember as we pause and reassess and take stock. It's a reminder that history almost never has moved in a straight line, that practitioners and advocates who drove lasting transformation were almost never doing the same thing at year 10, what they were doing at year 1. They all changed tack. And changing tack is a term, I think it comes from sailing. I'm not a sailor, but I have sailed on some activist boats and ships. So when the sailboat changes tack, it doesn't mean that it turns around and goes in the opposite direction. It just adjusts its angle to the wind to keep making progress towards the same destination. And the destination is constant, right? We still need to reach that part of the shore. The route you take is responsive to the conditions, and that is the adaptation, the adjustment that we do. Going back to that idea of reassessing is not giving up. Changing tack is not abandoning the mission, because the destination, like I said, remains the same. The route adjusts to the terrain at hand. It's very, as a researcher, I know I've had to shift methodology when it's suddenly ineffective. And it could be in any of the places that you work in. The destination, the goal can remain the constant, and the route we're always adjusting. And this is part of that long haul and the work that we do. Can we go to the next slide, please? And it's important to just sit back and think about what this might look like in our everyday life. So ask yourself, what form can my work take given where I am at? So for me, maybe it's mentoring instead of marching. I still march, Yes, we will still march. But there's also showing up when you can, how you can, for someone in your community. Maybe it's writing. Maybe it's quietly organizing the people around you, taking care of your neighbors, creating a plan, having a conversation. And I'm not giving the topics of those plans because I think the beginning is having that conversation. And you can, again, take any form that you want to take. Maybe it's us becoming the institutional memory that many institutions are not holding anymore or won't hold anymore. And all that quiet work is important work, right? And a lot of organizing work. We don't have to call ourselves organizers to be organizing. And all of that is a lot of quiet work. It happens in smaller groups. Can we go to the next slide? And stepping back from one form of engagement is not the same as stepping away from the work. Again, the same idea. We're not giving up. We're just getting creative. We're getting smart. So data is definitely one of our most powerful tools. You can tell it's powerful because that's where many oppressive regimes try to remove access to good data. They stop collecting important information that makes plans happen, that make decisions happen. So we need to continue having data that can speak, right? And high impact work continues despite many of these challenges. We have seen a huge removal of institutional data in the country, and I'm always looking for good news as well. So there are many grassroots data rescuers who have worked across the world to bring data back into the public domain, keep data clean, because data have been scrubbed and removed. And I'm also, again, from India, where the census has not been conducted for many years, and that impacts how resources and monies are allocated. So when you present, uh, yes, thank goodness for the data rescuers. When you present evidence clearly, right, that's where us as researchers and practitioners come in. Researchers producing the research, sometimes in collaboration with communities, practitioners often using some of that evidence. So when you present evidence clearly, accessibly, rigorously, it will travel, right? It will reach people who might never respond to, say, a protest, but will absolutely respond to a well-constructed, evidence-informed argument. So you lead with the data, and I'm not saying just the numbers, because I'm talking about all kinds of data. You maintain and protect the rigor. Let the facts do the confronting for you, and then critically and creatively present that data. That is one of the best forms of engagement available to us as researchers as well as practitioners. It positions us as rigorous, not necessarily radical, even though we may be, and as informing rather than confronting. And that framing is a tool that we can use deliberately, because we cannot look away from what's happening. Can we go to the next slide? And this is something, we think of each time we hold a focus group or a community discussion. Think about how you can attend and have more open discussions, facilitated debates, spaces where different perspectives can surface, including the uncomfortable ones. Um, this is where change occurs, when you see the shift in the air in the room, when you see that there are seeds planted in people who did not know that they were open to changing or growing or learning a new perspective. We see this a lot in our community engaged research on disaster preparedness in communities that, to the general public, are seemingly not interested in talking about climate change. Not true, by the way, because they are always the ones that bring up climate change. We don't always lead with climate change, but we see ideas and learnings through the facilitated dialogues. And the topic can be anything, right? Sometimes the biggest shifts in thinking happen in those conversations where that seed is planted, and sometimes the shift in perspectives and narratives is more quiet. Not just sometimes, I think most of the times that shift happens because that seed has been planted. Can we go to the next slide? And when we dig, I think, into the whys of why we feel sort of torn asunder, we can think about what actually breaks us when we are not necessarily always experiencing many of these crises directly. And what lies underneath so much of the fatigue that we are talking about is that feeling of alienation and disconnection. And that disconnection can sometimes be from the community, from meaning, from the sense that the structures that we work within, the tensions that I talked about, the structures that we work within are not seeing us, they don't hear us, they're not built for us. So alienation may be, and the disconnection may be the mechanism by which that fatigue sort of self-perpetuates. It keeps people isolated, keeps them doubting their own impact, keeps us thinking it's too large, what do I even do? And the work sort of quietly either slows down or worse, dies away without anyone having to stop it. So the antidote to that is not creating more heroes, but it's probably just fostering some form of togetherness. Can we go to the next slide? This is, I love this idea of movements beginning in living rooms and kitchens and cafes. Many of you may know Howard Zinn, the historian, World War II veteran, academic activist. He was famously fired from his position at Spelman College in Atlanta, USA, for insubordination because he joined the students in the movement against racial segregation in the 1960s. And many years later, he came back for their commencement address, and these were his words. The lesson of that history is that you must not despair, that if you're right and you persist, things will change. The government may try to deceive the people, and the newspapers and the television may do the same, but the truth has a way of coming out. The truth has a greater power than 100 lies. So this was said in 2005, right? And I think he was talking about invasion and war that time with the war in Iraq. The war is different. Occupation, he was talking about attacks on academic freedom, healthcare emergencies. He was talking about the climate crisis. All that to say, there have always been moments in history that people have felt despair, and yet that reminds us that we have to continue putting in the work because we are here for the long haul. And again, the power of the formal and informal groups, the fact that movements begin because we just look at one more person and say, we have to do something about this. And it doesn't have to be like the biggest movement, but that's how a lot of our current movements did start, including the one that the No Kings protest, for instance, the Black Lives Matter, they all started like this in small informal groups. Can you go to the next slide? So what does that look like on a practical note, right? Cultivating those informal groups and peer networks and conversations that happen because two people decide to have coffee or go for a walk. Those are not lesser forms of organizing. Like I said, those are actually foundational to organizing. The biggest driving force of organizing is always still continuing to be the one-on-one slow movement building, right? Because that connects us on so many different levels, not just on the specific cause that we are talking about. Even now, the big organizing conversations, people have is how do we reach everyone? And that has to be, that's why people go door to door. That's why people go meet one-on-one rather than talking to a big group of people. And I have certainly actively sought out many of these individuals and groups over the last few years. And we have done a lot of work, and I see them as so essential to my intellectual and emotional sustenance, right? And for many reasons, some of us have to give up or take a step back. And before we judge ourselves or others, we really need to understand it. That need for self-preservation is not necessarily always selfishness, right? It could be just the need for reassessing. And since we're talking a lot about taking care of ourselves, turning inward, and protecting our energy, our health, our relationships, those are not betrayals to the cause. They actually sometimes are needed for continuing it because a practitioner who's burnt out is not helpful to themselves or to anyone. And I just want to say that it's okay to turn inward. And if anyone remembers Dr. Martin Luther King's famous letter from Birmingham City Jail, it's a fantastic read, so much wealth of information over there. But he, in there, talks about the 4 steps for any nonviolent campaign, which is, I think, collecting facts, negotiating, self-purification, and direct action. Now, we know many of those, but we often don't talk about self-purification enough. And I'm coming at it from a very non-religious perspective. I know Dr. King was a very religious person. I work on disaster preparedness, and some of our work looks at what can I do for myself? What can I do for my neighbors? What can I do for my community in preparing for disasters? And I see that directly relate to this concept of self-purification. And as a meditator, so self-purification is what can I do to prepare myself physically, mentally, spiritually, to show up as a whole for my cause or causes or life or relationships, whatever it is that you need to do in that time and space. So here's an idea. I would encourage you to find time for, finding a time to meet someone physically, locally, if possible. And not because virtual connections don't matter. You know, thrive on virtual connections. I'm so happy that this is a virtual conference, especially this being an ecological conference. In fact, some of the first things I do to process a lot of the endless barrage of negative news sometimes is to reach out to my friends, to commiserate, to know that someone feels and knows and gets it. And that's really instrumental in keeping us going. But I'm saying to go and meet because it has become a challenge more and more for many of us. And definitely the pandemic had a role to play in that. But what happens in a shared physical space is not something that can be fully replicated, right? The eye contact, the weight of presence, the knowing that you're not alone in a way that your body actually believes. And I think I have one little blurb over there, no, one little bullet over there that says curate your news. Now, that's something I really feel strongly about because how many of you started this day with doom scrolling? You can put it in the chat. um, I will say that knowing, yeah, sad face, it's okay, no judgment here. I will say one practical tactic is not letting the news come to you, but you going and finding your news. So you curate those places that you go to for news because I am a news fiend, right? I need to know what's happening, but it is endless and you cannot keep track of it. So find those times that you go to the news and find the places that you trust and believe. And of course, find that community that you will share and workshop that with and reflect on it with. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think this is, I always have a lot of big pictures on my slides. It really is what you will make of it. It's about just all of those pieces about history not moving in the straight line, about not being afraid of winding paths, about not being able to, or being able to pause and rest and not be afraid of starting over and finding your people and keeping them nearby if you can, but keeping them close in any which way that's possible. And then you keep finding them because the world does not need us to be martyrs. It just needs us to keep on keeping on. Can we go to the next slide, please? And I know that there is a lot of collective wisdom right here on this Zoom call. So again, I would love to draw on your ideas and experiences and imagination, which is a huge tool in, that piece of spontaneous hope. Because every change that has happened was imagined by someone sometime. So think about what would changing tack look like for you in whatever it is that you do, or what does it look like for you right now? And what does your work look like given your capacity, risks, life stage, location, community, or personal need? What has changed, and what do you think are the risks? And I'll throw another one in here, which is not on the screen just for kicks. what do you do to keep on keeping on? Thank you, Georgiana. Can we go to the next slide as people are still thinking? So that need for continued collective and shared strategies to address all of these challenges is urgent and it's immense, right? Eco anxiety, climate anxiety, other forms of anxiety, many of which are sometimes underlying, many times commingled. They collide with many other existential threats because we recognize that environmental and climate issues are almost never just environmental and climate issues. They are, as we discussed, housing issues, they are issues of food and health, they are issues of reproductive justice, immigrant and refugee rights. They are an anti-carceral issue. It's a community issue, so much more. The need to build alliances to create those spaces of solidarity, because there's always an Audre Lorde quote for all of these, that we don't lead single issue lives. So all of these issues are connected. And most importantly, I think, and that's something that's a practice, to find your people and organizing homes, like find a home to organize in whatever that issue is, and then build those connections outward, because those can really buttress the existing communities of care that you may or may not have. And just remember, as Mr. Naidu's friend reminded us all, that we are sort of in this work for the rest of our lives. I would love to learn from all of you. I think that's the end of my slides. But I'd just love to hear folks' ideas, thoughts, and I will take my time going through the chat.
I don't know, is now an appropriate time to talk, to say something to you, or do you just want us to use the chat?
Oh, please talk.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Well, thank you. I just want to say, I said thank you in the chat, but um, this idea that we don't have to be martyrs, we just have to keep on keeping on, that really resonates for me as an academic and practitioner and researcher living and working in the state of Texas. That's very much kind of clamping down. I know Ohio, Florida, you guys are giving us a run for our money, but I think we're winning, um, not winning. The threats to just our livelihood and our jobs and our certainly freedom of speech is very real. I'm even hesitant to say that publicly, but I will, knowing that many of us may be in the same boat. So that just gives me a lot of hope that the work that I'm doing to advance, my research in this area and mentor and support my students, that is in and of itself a form of activism. I think I suffer just from those chronic feelings of like, but it's not enough. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to really break it down for us, that the small steps that we're taking, especially when we do that in community, are effectual. They really do matter. So I just want to say thank you for that.
thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. And a lot of it was also a dialogue with myself too. I'm like, it's okay. Okay. Other thoughts, ideas, questions? I see many of my heroes and colleagues and friends here, so please feel free to jump in. And I will say I don't see myself as a keynote speaker, so I'm just sharing what felt like an authentic response to this amazing theme that the organizers came up with. So real.
I want to say something about you mentioned, and I don't know if this was your quote or if it came from somewhere, but really resonates about imagination being a tool as part of this spontaneous hope. Um, I'm doing some research for my dissertation right now and interviewing social workers. And one of the interesting things that has come up over and over again when I ask the question about what do you think is important for a future disaster social worker to know is to have imagination and be curious and creative. And so to hear that again today, it almost like brings tears to my eyes because it really is speaking to what folks are feeling and thinking, but we don't always articulate that as part of our work and our effort and our process and our tools. So I just really appreciate you naming that.
Thank you, Renee. And many folks have said this about imagination, right? My favorite authors, like a lot of speculative fiction is really imagination of what can happen if things go down this path, for instance. And I think you all had Dr. Neeson as a speaker a few years back. So a lot of futurists talk about imagination as that tool. And everybody has, change has always happened because somebody imagined that this is not how things should be. How can we make it better? And that whole idea of keeping on. And um, I think Rebecca Solnit has talked about imagination as that big, important, powerful tool. So yeah, many, many folks have talked like that. Uh, Changing tack, how did it look like for me in my work? Yeah, so if you look at my CV, I did not want to be an academic. I was not an academic. I was an activist. I was a community organizer. I was a disaster response professional. So my work has always been on environmental and climate issues, which almost never, like I said, were only environmental and climate issues. They almost always coincided with the need for representation in communities. Um, and I think changing tack has also meant changing my roles, right? Like I am now an academic, which I never thought I would be. I love it. But I also still keep drawing from those experiences as a brand new social worker in the Nicobar Islands right after the 2004 tsunami had happened. And I was working with no communication tools, there were no cell phone networks, and just working with communities who all talked about how this barrage of change is coming over, and they have not enough representation, being a liaison with the government, talking about what the community needs are, making sure their ways of life are not uprooted along with, their homes that were uprooted. So I think changing tack has really meant keeping that destination the same, but changing my role in how I show up in the world. Um, and what do I do to keep on keeping on? I think I mentioned a few of those things that a lot of some of my friends and colleagues are here. We commiserate. I reached out to many friends, every time something happens virtually and also in person in our college. Some of us last year started a small meditation group. I love that idea of a meditation garden, Dr. Nair. I would love to see that too. But we started a meditation group in our college, which is open to all. All forms of meditation are allowed. If you're not a meditator, you're still welcome. One of us will talk you through. And we really have created that space because of a lot of those onslaughts of, you know, laws that were happening that were affecting all of us, and we felt more disconnected. And we sit for 1 hour. We don't sit the entire time meditating. We really meditate only for 15 minutes, then take a break, and then 5 minutes more. But really, it's become that time every week that we sit and talk about all kinds of things in the middle of the workday. That's fast become one of my favorite things of the week because it forces me to put an end to my email, go and sit with people, and we talk about anything, about causes, about cats, about what folks are doing in their classes. We've opened it up to students. We had an entire undergrad class come in once. It's just been a fun change, and I feel like this is something that's so needed, and yeah, just helps us keep on keeping on. Yeah, a solid topic. I agree. I think we're at time, but I would love to thank the organizers, Renee and Georgiana and Kelly and Erin and so many others, and all of you for giving me the space and listening and engaging. And I'll keep quiet now and go through the chat and download everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Smitha. I think a lot of folks are likely processing the deep work that you just presented to us. I think one of the more powerful things that I heard was really that idea of it's not about giving your life, but the rest of your life. It really resonated with me as a practitioner that really centers anti-racist trauma-informed work, that we have to keep doing this work in the ways that we can, that we're comfortable. And it really reminds me too of the concept of fugitive pedagogy, which a lot of us are being challenged with right now, continuing to do our anti-DEI work, our environmental justice work, under different names, under different contexts, in different locations than we often are used to doing. So I really thank you for naming all of that, for really prioritizing the balance between continuing that work, but also recognizing our individual identities and how we can do that work. So I loved everything you had to say, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. So we're going to go into our break. At this point, this will be our first break of the day. So as we begin this break, I want to welcome you to listen to a video that I was introduced to by one of my students that will be presenting later today. It is a Ukrainian song that will be paired with video of their old growth forest. And this is a modern folk-inspired Ukrainian song that's based on traditional music related to kind of harvest within Ukrainian culture. And the lyrics, although they are in Ukrainian, do really focus on old growth forest in Ukraine, mythology around trees and rivers, and the idea that Ukraine is an ancient living land. So we selected this video just because of the powerful messages surrounding that. And as a reminder kind of how culture, peoples, and nature are being equally put at risk by all of the polycrises that we've talked about so far today. So allow me to just share my video. So this is about 1 minute. We're going to be going directly into our break from there. And we will be reconvening around 11:34, 11:35. So let me share my screen.
I just want to also name to folks, there are some big Zoom outages going on across the country right now. We're getting kicked out of the room left and right here, the hosts of this event today. So if for some reason Georgiana shares it and we all go goodbye, we will all come back together. But just know this is a universal issue right now. It seems that we're all might be facing.
Yes, thank you. The new unstable world that we live in. Okay, here you go. Can folks hear this?
Yes.
Tourists stumble down Broadway, Cumberland keeps claiming bodies. All our best memories were bought and then turned into apartments. The club with all the hardcore shows, now just a grayscale dominoes. The churches overflow each Sunday, greedy Sunday morning. Gift shop in the lobby, act like God ain't watching. Kill the soul, turn a profit. What lives on Southern Gotham? I'm the one who still loves your ghost. I reanimate your bones with my belief. I'm the one who still loves your ghost. I reanimate
We're taking a break and we'll be back in about 10 minutes, folks.
They put up chain link.
Really like moments of enlightenment and opportunity. And so each speaker session will be able, each group will be able to speak for themselves, introduce themselves. I will put a 5-minute timer on. You may hear a ding a little bit at the end. I hate interrupting. I don't mean to be rude, but we are going to try to stay on time. And we'll hold about 2 minutes for like 1 or 2 questions after each session, and then we'll roll into the next. Sound good? Thank you, Anna.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anna. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope
Yep,
so.
you're good.
Great. Hi, I'm Anna, and thank you for allowing me to be here today. I want to begin with a simple question. Think back to your earliest memories of being in nature. Maybe it was watching spring flowers bloom, standing near a river, or seeing litter along a stream. Maybe it was a moment that sparked curiosity, concern, or a desire to make change. Now think about this. How many of those early experiences shaped the work you chose to pursue or the issues that you care about today? Who helped guide you towards that career path? Because those moments and those connections matter. They help shape how we understand our relationships to the environment, the opportunities we believe are possible, and whether we see ourselves as capable of participating in solutions. But access to environmental experiences, opportunities, and career pathways is not always equally shared. We are living in a time of intensifying climate change, flooding, heat, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And these impacts fall hardest on communities already facing systemic inequities, environmental racism, and unequal access to resources. Environmental issues are not just ecological, they're social, structural, and deeply human. And young people care. They care about climate change, water quality, and justice. But too few see environmental careers as a realistic pathway, not because they lack interest, but because there are real barriers to access and opportunities. Next slide, please. In a study conducted with school counselors across Pennsylvania, we found something striking. Students are asking about environmental careers, and school counselors believe these careers are increasingly important. Yet many counselors lack the knowledge, tools, and resources needed to guide students effectively into this workforce. We're left with a systemic gap between interest and opportunity, between care and career. Students face barriers, including limited exposure to careers, lack of representation, transportation challenges, competing responsibilities, and fragmented systems that fail to connect education, community, and workforce pathways. At the same time, many of the people best positioned to support students are working separately rather than collaboratively. Environmental professionals and educators, school counselors, social workers, community organizations, and families all bring essential perspectives to this work, helping students navigate systems, relationships, barriers, and opportunities. Because this is not just about informing students. It's not just about awareness of a career. It's about making meaningful connections. Environmental professionals cannot remain at the edges of education systems, Partnerships matter. School counselors help students navigate possibility and opportunity, while social workers bring insight into trauma, access, justice, and the structural realities that shape whether students can envision and attain those environmental careers. If we're serious about equity, then we must move from isolated efforts to shared responsibilities across roles, sectors, and systems. Careers don't emerge just from interest alone. They grow through exposure, relationships, confidence, and belonging. So the question becomes, how do we build a future where more students can see themselves not just as observers, but as participants and leaders? The research conducted pointed to three simple shifts. First, outreach. We can't wait for students to find environmental careers. We have to meet them where we are and meet them where they are and make those opportunities visible, because you cannot become what you've not seen. Second, collaboration. This work cannot live in silos. Educators, school counselors, families and social workers and community organizations all have a role to play. When we work together, learning becomes relevant and rooted in lived experiences. Third, practical resources, not just information, but opportunity, internship, service learning projects, mentorships, and accessible information and real-world problem solving rooted into the educational system. Because hands-on experiences don't just teach skills, they help build identity and spark interest. And this is where environmental justice comes full circle. When we expand who can enter and who enters those environmental careers, we expand whose knowledge shapes solutions. I'll leave you with this. What if creating a more just and sustainable future depends not only on the solutions that we develop, but who has access to shape them? What if the future of environmental justice depends not only on awareness, but on expanding access, opportunity, and representation in those career fields, so that students most affected by environmental challenges can participate and lead the solutions? Our work must be much more than raising awareness about jobs and careers. It's about creating a real workforce and career pathways for people to participate, lead, and shape change. Thank you.
Perfection with the timing, Anna. And what a fabulous conversation you've brought to us. Thank you so much. I'll open it up for questions. If you would like to come on audio or bring them into the chat, please do so.
Thank you for all the hearts. Much appreciated.
I'm curious if you've done like in speaking to students and like thinking about the career path, like have you seen any like exemplars of where this is being done really well?
So what I can speak of is I'm here in Pennsylvania, and I've seen in some of our state park systems where they're actively going out and seeking opportunities to bring students, both young people who may be looking for an internship or maybe just a job shadow in the high school years, out into the parks and showing them all of the myriad of possibilities within those types of environmental careers. And I know this is a small group of environmental careers. There's so many out there. And actively talking about this is a career pathway, and these are kind of the steps in order to get here, and these are the scholarships, and how can I help you, and can I connect you to a mentor? So it's really about that active community person going out and talking to a school counselor. And then in Pennsylvania, there's some really nice programs that work with college students that are it's called a POC, it's Pennsylvania Outdoor Corps here. So that really is talking to those 18 plus people. It's a real job. It provides transportation into the field to do the work. It's, a nice wage. And if they are out in more of a rural location, it does have housing. So again, they're doing the job, and the people surrounding them, they're bringing people in to talk about their careers, not just a park manager, not just a ranger, an environmental educator, anybody who can touch on that workforce. So I think I think it takes a lot of community. I'm a social worker. My husband's a park manager. So we kind of bounce back and forth on this passion. But I do think it takes a lot of encouragement for the community to feel that they need to do this work as well, because social workers, school counselors don't know what resources are out there.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was awesome, and I appreciate the response. Any other
Yeah.
questions? Maybe we can put them in the chat for you to reply there.
Absolutely. And I do apologize. I may need to scoot for a personal responsibility here, but if somebody could email them to me, I will love to get back to somebody via email or have like a side conversation. But I will look in the chat before I leave.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome up Vanessa Clark next. Thank you, Anna. Vanessa, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much, Kelly. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Vanessa Clark, and today I'm talking about skincare as more than a personal or a cosmetic practice, but more from a social work perspective. Skincare reflects identity, access, wellness, and the social conditions that shape everyday life. Skincare is not only about products or routines, but it carries social and political meanings because it's shaped by race and class, identity, environment, and access. Skincare is social because how people feel about their skin is often tied to larger systems of inequality. This internalized stress can show up in anxiety, depression, and negative body image. And when we're thinking about holistic wellness, this also includes the absence of wellness, but also dignity and belonging, safety, and the ability to thrive in one's context of their community. Skincare can be part of how people protect their dignity, how they manage stress, and feel seen in their communities as well. There are some structural barriers that we'll show on the next slide, sorry, the next two slides as well. I apologize, I forgot to give you the prompts. Um, with these structural barriers, we're thinking more about social determinants of health, including economic stability, neighborhood conditions, and access to care. And these factors also influence who can get effective dermatology or aesthetic services, which emphasizes that access matters. And skincare is not just a consumer choice, but it's also shaped by systems that distribute resources, safety, and dignity unevenly as well. On the next slide, we're going to talk more specifically about some of these environmental stressors because it is a key part of why skincare is such a social issue. So, air pollution and exhaust, which can contribute to inflammation, oxidative stress, conditions like eczema and acne, or even UV exposure, especially for people who work outdoors or live in neighborhoods with extreme heat and limited shade. There's also harsh weather that can dry out skin, damage the skin barrier, and even worsen skin conditions. Indoor environmental stressors like poor ventilation, mold, extreme temperatures, or even crowded housing can further aggravate skin and even respiratory conditions health altogether. This means that chronic exposure to environmental stressors is not just background noise, it's a real social determinant of health and it shows up in the skin. On the next slide, where we'll have this graphic, I just want you to think about neighborhoods, particularly within New York City. Neighborhoods that are more polluted, that might have more traffic, less green space, older housing, and fewer resources, typically with communities of color and low income communities. This means that environmental stress on the skin is not evenly distributed. It follows a pattern of racism and economic inequality, and even policy choices about where polluting industries are located, where the trees are planted, how housing is maintained, and how public resources are allocated. So, for example, let's say someone living in a neighborhood with poor air quality, high traffic, limited access to quality health care, they may have a higher baseline for inflammation and stress. And then this can then make their skin more reactive, more prone to breakouts, more sensitive, and slower to heal as well. At the same time, they may not be able to afford high-end skincare, dermatology visits, or even consistent access to clean water, let alone specialized care. At the same time, chronic stress from social environmental conditions, compounded like discrimination or unsafe neighborhoods or housing instability or working multiple jobs in harsh conditions also affects the skin. This also affects stress hormones like cortisol and how the skin behaves. It can increase oil production, slow the healing, and worsen conditions like eczema or psoriasis or even acne. Outside of all the esthetician terms, in social work terms, it means that a client's skin conditions are rarely just skin deep. They're really embedded in a web of environmental and social stressors that social workers see every day. Poverty, unsafe housing, discrimination, violence, food insecurity, and lack of access to healthcare. Environmental stress on skin is therefore also a social justice issue, and people in marginalized communities are more likely to face harmful environmental conditions and less likely to have access to resources that protect and heal their skin and their body. On the next slide, we're just going to have a few practice implications, which do include normalizing skincare as wellness and not just about vanity. Referring to culturally responsive providers, advocating for better air quality, safer housing, clean water, equitable access, center community voices. And in closing, just on the last slide, skincare is not only about products or routines. It's shaped by race, class, identity, environment, and access. It reflects identity, trauma, resilience, and the conditions which people live in. A social work response is going to ask us to look beyond the individual or the person themselves, but instead see the systems that are also existing around them. And then that shift will help us support wellness in a way that's more humane, more inclusive, and more just. Because when we treat skincare as a social issue, we're also saying that your skin matters, your environment matters, and your community health matters. Thank you.
Brilliant, Vanessa. Thank you so very much. I'm going to open it up for questions.
Thank you. You're welcome, Stacy. It was my pleasure. And thank you for all the hearts, everyone.
You had a lot of folks saying that they'd never thought about this topic in that way, so we're very happy and grateful to have you bring this to us today.
It is my honor. It's a merging of two worlds. You know, a lot of my earlier education has been in social work, and then later I had returned to school for esthetician, and became licensed in that. And that's where I really started to see that there are some overlapping aspects here when it comes to social environments and social work that we should probably consider a little further beyond just TikTok and what's on the bottle. So I'm glad to bring it into the conversation, and I'm hoping at some point we can continue to have this conversation in other spaces as well.
Thank you so
Absolutely.
much, Vanessa. I'm going to pass it on to Georgiana.
Yes, thank you so much, Vanessa. Sabine, I'm just trying to find you to spotlight you, but we will have your slides up in a second. There you are. And you are good to go.
Thank you. Rachel, you want to go ahead?
Absolutely. Thank you. It's so good to see you all. Sabina and I will be sharing about our scoping review. And the background and context for this is that climate change is an intensifying global crisis. There's interconnections with ecological and social justice impacts. Some of the key impacts and consequences reflected in the literature are mental health challenges, increasing food insecurity, climate refugees and displacement, and widening structural inequalities. These impacts globally, as well as in the US, are disproportionately affecting marginalized populations. And while environmental justice is recognized in social work policy, there is not as much reflected and integrated into practice interventions. And we can go to the next slide. You'll see that we discuss environmentally informed approaches. And what we mean by that is that's an umbrella term for a lot of different terminologies that people are using. So it includes green social work, environmental social work, deep ecological social work, and eco-social work. All of these approaches challenge colonialism and capitalism and expand the focus of our person and environment to include the natural environment. The social work literature in response to the global climate crisis is growing. However, much of it focuses on calls to action rather than providing tangible practice interventions. And so because of this, we have our research question, which will be on the next slide. We were curious to explore what is known in the social work literature about the extent and nature of environmentally informed social work interventions globally. The methodology we used for our scoping review was Arksy and O'Malley's scoping review framework. It's a 5-stage framework where we identified a research question, we identified relevant studies. Using our criteria, which I'll share in a minute, we selected studies that fit our search, and then we charted the data, summarized it, and are reporting it out to all of you. We did this search or conducted this search in consultation with a university librarian at Loyola University Chicago, where we're both students. And the databases we searched were social work abstracts, social services abstracts, and social sciences citation index. Thank you. So our screening, our inclusion criteria, we were curious about interventions that are reflected in the literature over the past 10 years. So we looked between January 1st, 2015 and January 1st, 2026. And social work literature is defined in this study as meeting one or more of the following. So it was either published in a social work journal, published by a social work association, or was authored by at least one person with a social work affiliation. And importantly, the article needed to discuss a social work intervention that was informed in some way by the natural environment. We excluded gray literature. We excluded articles that were calls to action, hypothetical, or problem focused. And we excluded existing scoping reviews and systematic reviews. You can see our chart on the right of our process for applying this criteria. So the searches in the databases I mentioned yielded an initial 208 articles. We screened each of those 208 articles by their title and abstract, and that led to the exclusion of 158 of those. We then did a full article review and read all 50 articles, which resulted in the 31 articles that we'll be presenting to you today.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Rachel. I will walk you through the results of our scoping review now. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so we mapped out, sorry, the graphic somehow got messed up, but we mapped out all environmentally informed social work interventions that we identified in total, 31 interventions, 31 articles, spanning over 17 countries. And on this map, it's striking that the global north by far dominates the interventions we identified. Australia leading with 9, followed by the US with 8, and Canada with 5. So in total, out of the 31, 22 are identified in wealthier English-speaking countries of the global north. So the geographical spread is highly uneven. No interventions identified in South America, on the African continent, just 2 in South Africa and in Zimbabwe. In Europe, Greece, Slovenia, the Netherlands, Ireland, UK, Switzerland, Finland, the Czech Republic, and Germany was represented. Also on the Asian continent, Southeast Asia is totally blank, even though it's a region that very much consists of islands that are highly impacted by rising sea levels. Yeah, but we assert that those blank spaces do not mean that there are no interventions happening. They're just not identified or reported, but we'll come back to that when talk about implications of our review. Next slide, please.
Sorry, everything's freezing on me.
No worries.
There you go.
Oh, yeah. So here you see the frequency of intervention types. So we took the 31 interventions and grouped them into 7 different categories, which you can see here. By far, the most interventions with 10 we found in the category of education and practitioner training, followed by post-disaster social work, food systems, and food justice with 6. 3 interventions we identified in the category of community gardening, and then the least of just 2 in the categories of clinical and therapeutic interventions, community organizing, and social and care farming. And on the next slide, I will give some examples of what are the concrete interventions that we found in these articles. So when it comes to education and training, we identified social workers who integrated ecosocial work into course material for Master of Social Work programs, nature-based field education, and curriculum development in that sense. But also interestingly, documented is an experiential learning tool. They did an ecological devastation bus tour that is taking students, community leaders, community members to sites of environmental injustice. Also, a scenario-based training and a case study model was mentioned in the literature that has been used, and participatory action research to build ecosocial competencies and awareness among practitioners. In the category of post-disaster social work, again, we identified 6 interventions, that range from psychosocial support to humanitarian aid that was done by social workers. And since we looked at this globally, the disasters that social workers responded to ranged from wildfires to earthquakes, floods, cyclones, tsunamis, but also COVID-19 was mentioned. In the category of food systems and food justice, we also identified 6 interventions. For example, community kitchens were installed in a very hazard-affected region in China following an earthquake. Also, social economy was mentioned, linking rural cooperatives to farmers so they could directly sell their food to urban consumers for a lower price and have more food sustainability. Also, food justice courses and assignments were implemented in social work education, and we are aware that this could fit into the education bucket as well. But for simplicity of this presentation, we kept it like this, and we want to, at some point, publish our findings, and then we will discuss the overlap in more depth. Another intervention mentioned was food sovereignty and mutual aid, drawing on indigenous knowledge, participatory action research around food safety education, and a Slovenian article was around charitable food aid and surplus food distribution within the Slovenian welfare state. Next slide, please. Here you can see the 4 categories with the least interventions. Maybe not so much as a surprise. Community gardens were mentioned as a site for eco-social work practice, but also that extended beyond like the community purpose to therapeutic gardening groups with children who experience maltreatment, and internet-based gardening following COVID or during the COVID-19 isolation. Their social workers in China implemented this internet-based gardening tool to build resilience and community bonds. As clinical and therapeutic interventions, acceptance and commitment therapy to address eco-anxiety was mentioned, and also the integration of land and place into direct social work practice, which is in the article also tied to indigenous knowledge. For community organizing, and we talk about community organizing that's specifically done or at least partially done by social workers, we only identified 2 interventions. One was a community organization working with social workers around building power around environmental concerns in Baltimore, and then also a youth-led campaign led by high school students, but co-led by a social worker against a waste incinerator. And lastly, we identified social and care farming, and in our scoping review, social farming refers to nature-based social work practice that uses agriculture as a setting. That's, I believe, a European article. So really, active farming is the social work intervention. And care farming here refers to farming families providing foster care. That was done in Switzerland. So really a wide range of different methods. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, our scoping review maps the types of environmentally informed interventions emerging in different regions worldwide. And we were hoping to provide researchers and practitioners with examples of concrete and tangible approaches that have been applied. And by looking outside of the boundaries of the US, we were hoping to strengthen cross-regional learning and collaboration, because we believe there's much to learn from different regions of the world. Next slide, please. So lastly, I think for all of us, it's important to learn from the very context-specific responses to climate change and environmental challenges. While the implications of climate change are global, I think our responses they must be adapted very much to the local context. And for research specifically, we see a need to explore other interventions that may occur in the global south. You remember the map and so many blank spaces, and we assert that there are interventions happening. They're just not reflected in the literature that we are using. So there really is a need to partner with communities to understand what other approaches are used, and not only partner with communities in the global south, but also in the US or wherever you are at right now. Because 31 interventions over 10 years is really not much. And for practice, we see a need to really adapt and apply interventions or use the global interventions we identified and adapt them to the local context to put the call to actions into action. Anything you would like to add, Rachel?
I think that covered it. Thank you all so much. We would welcome any questions or feedback, thoughts.
This was excellent. Thank you both so very much. Let's see if some additional thoughts come through in the chat. I'm seeing people responding back already here.
I, I was just going to ask, it sounds like you have plans to publish this, but it's not yet published. Is that correct?
Yes, we're still working on a manuscript.
And the second question, and this is maybe to the broader group because I've seen similar things. I'm wondering if anybody is aware of any literature reviews or endeavors that have explored the gray literature, because I think there are some of these things going on and people are writing about them in the gray literature, but I don't know that our environmental social work literature captures that well. So curious if you all know of any. I know the study in particular didn't look at that, but I'm curious if anybody knows of other literature reviews that have, because I think that's perhaps a gap.
Yes, I would love if anybody else knows of one, but there is one that really inspired our search that was able to include gray literature, and it's the Mason et al. Article, Sabina. I can put the citation in here. It's more specific in looking at interventions. But yeah, I can share that. I agree with you, though. I think that's a really good point.
I think it's also a point of equity, right? Like we know, Sabina, I really appreciate you kind of highlighting that there is kind of this gatekeeping piece and, English dominance in a lot of the journals. So I think that is kind of the outlet is seeing where else these are being revealed and shared. They might be being shared as local community opinion pieces, for example, because I've found several interventions that have been shared more in that way that haven't made it into journals. So I think this is just such an interesting concept, and I thank you for bringing it here today.
Agreed. And I'd hope to see it again, like replicated in another several years and see, hopefully there's even more representation at that point. Well, thank you for your very excellent talk. Are there any other questions? I think I heard somebody.
This is Georgia again. I don't want to dominate time, but I'm really curious. You talked about the value and kind of importance of making this something actionable for folks that are reading your research. And I know we only really have about 1 minute left, but what are kind of your preliminary ideas about how to really make that actionable, right? Like, are you making a framework based on what you're finding, or what is that looking like for you?
Oh, sorry. I was deep trying to find this review, which I'll put in the chat. That's a really good question. This is our first presentation on it, and we are working on the manuscript. So I think, to be honest, haven't thought about whether we would create a framework. I know we were hoping to provide a bank of interventions so that people could access them, apply them. I think what we talked about, gatekeeping not only in publication, but also what is published can also just live in that publication. So how do we make community-faced reports, or yeah, how do we share it out in a way that's accessible? So that would be hopefully an open access article at minimum. And then hopefully then the list would be able to be shared with social work practitioners that could apply them or try them out. If you have other thoughts or suggestions, we're both students, and this was a really great opportunity for us to learn. And I think publications are stronger with community and collective input. So please reach out to us. I'll put the article in the chat and then our emails. Thank you.
Thank you both again. Excellent. All right, I'm excited to welcome our next group, Building Livelihoods Within Fragile Ecosystems, Economic Empowerment in Kakuma. Thank you all.
Hello, my name is Anna Gavyazda, and today my team and I are thrilled to be presenting our co-collaborative pilot program with you all. The project is a collaboration between Nicole Bellinado and myself, who are both Monmouth University MSW students and who have worked in the field of humanitarian development, and Seth Mugani and Joseph Nduwimana, the founders of the Discover organization based in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. The work we are presenting on today is built on addressing urgent needs. Refugees globally are facing mounting funding cuts alongside growing climate-related challenges, and together those pressures are increasing vulnerabilities. Which brings us to today's presentation, Building Livelihoods with Fragile Ecosystems, Economic Empowerment in Kakuma. We can go to the next slide.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne, for the introduction. First, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Joseph Ndimana. I'm a co-founder and I work as a managing director at Discover organization based in Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. I'm happy to be presenting today here. So I will jump into first background about displacement. I would like to start by worldwide. We have more than 117 million forcibly displaced people globally, around more than 6 countries around the world. And specifically in Kenya, we have around 800,000 refugees and asylum seekers who are displaced through a different insecurity war, and most of them coming from South Sudan and Sudan since 1992. And talking about displaced community, we are experiencing extremely challenging environment here, especially here in Kakuma, as I can mention, where we are living in a semi-arid desert, whereby we don't have fertile land, and also we don't experience rain. For example, I can say sometimes we usually have rain once per year, which is a very, very challenging condition for us. And again, sometimes due to that condition, we find that we cannot have a good, we don't have a good condition for agriculture because of the climate change and also the area that we are in. Next slide, please. And let me talk again about Kakuma refugee camp. It's one of the largest refugee camp in the world that was established in 1992 because of the crisis or war that was happening in South Sudan and Sudan. And since now it is hosting more than 300,000 refugees since the war in Sudan, and it has increased by receiving people from different countries such as DRC, Congo, Burundi, Ethiopia, and Uganda. And now we have received people from Eritrea and also people from Afghanistan. We have people from Afghanistan now in Kakuma refugee camp. And with that, it has now, when we look the life of the life in the refugee camp here in Kakuma refugee camp, we find that 60% of refugee live below poverty line of 1.9 per day. And this is because of the situation in Kakuma and given to a situation that is happening right now, whereby US aid cut fund that happened in 2025. Now the life has become very risky for refugees. Now it has decreased, whereby now refugees was only depending on aid from different countries such as USAID and also help from USR. Next slide, please. Talking about the challenge and what is happening due to US aid fund cut, found that refugees mostly were depending on US aid and also from UNHCR. And after the US aid fund cut, we find that now refugees are at risk whereby they don't now, UNHCR does not provide enough food and also enough service for refugees in Kakuma refugee camp, whereby most of the refugees, around 7% of them were depending on the aid from those countries. And given to that condition of funding cuts and also climate change, it's put refugees at great risk, whereby most of them we witness people from South Sudan return back because of the situation. Because now in Kakuma refugee camp, UNHCR was now forced to come up with a new plan whereby they came up with a strategy where they have to categorize people into 4 categories. We have category 1, category 2, 3, and 4, whereby people who are placed in category 1 and category 2 are those people who have nothing, who cannot provide for themselves, who cannot provide for their kids and families. And for category 4, 3 and 4 are those people who at least have work to do, whom can provide for themselves and from their family. But looking into the situation, we find that even those people who are placed in category 3 and 4, still yet they need support because we don't have opportunities in Kakuma. We don't have job. There's a lot of challenge, job access, and also we are restricted. For example, now in Kakuma refugee camp, we are only allowed to work from 6 a.m. up to 7 p.m. at least, whereby you find that we don't have enough time even to work to try to earn. So with this has put most of us refugees, not only that UNHCR has come up with that strategy of categorizing people, at least for those who need urgent support, to have at least a small support, but still yet it seems like all of us in Kakuma refugee camp, we still need support. Although there are some who receive the food, because I can say at first we had around 60% of food was given to refugees, but now you find that people in category 1 and 2 are receiving less than 10% of the food, which even cannot take them in a full month of that. So this is a very, very harsh condition for us in refugee camps since 2025 up to now. And given to a situation where we are, we don't have fertile land, climate change, and also with our condition in Kakuma, it's a really very hard situation for refugees in Kakuma. Thank you so much. I would like to hand over to Seth. Thank you.
Yes, next slide, please. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Just a brief introduction. I'm Seth Mugenyi, Executive Director at Discover Organization, also working with Joseph as our co-founders. We are working together on Discover Organization. Yes, so the problem that we are having a lot of limited restriction in Kakuma currently, whereby we don't have really time to travel. For the refugees, like we are very limited to travel. And also we are having the challenge of needed so that we can really expand our businesses and also do the work that we are having. And also we are having some small businesses for mothers and also teenage mothers, of which they really lack the capital to expand their work, not only the capital, but also the knowledge that they need to manage their finances once they have that opportunity. And also the gap is that we are having the gap for police and also other practical, which limit us to have the really capacity of maybe maintaining money and also having the circulation. This also has made the refugee to rely on not having their personal data bundles, and also not having their internet to connect with their beloved one at home, and also to know what's going on, in the world currently. Yeah, next slide, please. Yes, here is now why we came up with this idea. Now, Discover is a refugee-led organization that was created in 2021, and also be able, which is one of the key achievements, to be able to be registered with the government of Kenya in 2023 with I and also my colleague Joseph Nduimana. So we are a community-based organization that we are using two pillars, which one is education, and then the second one is enhance a self-reliant using livelihood. So under our program, we are having English language, of which is a very critical for everyone, most vulnerable refugees in Kakuma, to understand English language so that they can be able to communicate freely, to join with other people, also to access online opportunity, because having the knowledge of language will make them to be aware of a different opportunity worldwide. We are also having social entrepreneurship with our most popular partners, which is Amala based in London, of which they are implementing other program, change maker program in the refugee settings, of which we've been able to partner with them, running a social entrepreneurship course, making most vulnerable refugees to save, to do some businesses, and also to have businesses idea that will help them. Also, we are having a practical skills and our livelihood program for self-reliant, whereby they can be able to have the skills in their dressing, tailoring, and also cyber security, of which now, as I'm speaking, we have been able to reach out to 500 plus most beneficiaries in Kakuma refugee camp that is having a lot of 300,000 refugees. Next slide. Yes, and now this is now an opportunity. Yeah, so and now we have to empower. We believe that a refugee can drive economic growth, can enhance public finance, or can create a more dynamic labor around the refugee community, not only in the refugee community, but globally. And this is coming from the issue of the UNHCR that also believe that a refugee have produced 3.4 plus, and also they have created jobs opportunities, and also they have contributed to the health, education, and also they have strengthened their economic by 6% for them once they have the skills. Yeah, thank you so much. I will proceed to Anne or Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth, so much. And thank you, Joseph. We can go to the next slide. So Anna and I are working together with Seth and Joseph to create a complementary program that will be housed within the Discover and their existing programming. Our mission is to equip refugee entrepreneurs with skills and savings for economic mobility. And the theory of change behind this program is that if we can implement financial literacy training in conjunction with community savings and loans, then existing and new small business owners in Kakuma will have access to capital that they need and the knowledge to manage their income as well as their expenditures. And then participants in this program will be empowered for self-sustaining and for sustaining their families economically, and the Kakuma market of large will be strengthened through better money circulation. And this theory of change was developed directly in relation to deep listening that the four of us conducted together, where Seth and Joseph really shared about the various challenges and barriers that they highlighted in their presentation and helped to narrow down the importance of focusing through our program on the lack of capital and also the need for financial literacy skills. So we can go to the next slide, please. This led to the birth of a program called the Discover Economic Empowerment Program, or DEEP, in which we are leveraging local leadership through the Discover and global evidence on how to effectively conduct financial literacy training among refugee populations and establish a community savings and loan group. So we are piloting this program together, and together we are co-designing a joint financial literacy curriculum with a community community savings and loan strategy. We're including both implementation and evaluation planning, and the program will be implemented across 2 phases using these evidence-based curricula, which are a financial literacy training toolkit for refugees by UNCDF, and then a Peace Corps model for savings and loan associations. Our target population with the Discover program is male and female small business owners or entrepreneurs and new entrepreneurs. This goes hand in hand with the Amala Partnership Social Entrepreneurship Program that Seth was describing, which they have already been running for some time now. Our initial pilot cohort will include 10 to 15 individuals in year 1, and the timeline is roughly 12 to 15 months of the programming, where group establishment will take 1 to 2 weeks. The financial literacy training will be conducted across 5 to 9 weeks, and then an active community savings and loan group will be implemented through 9 to 12 months with the option of continuing into subsequent years. Next slide, please. And I will turn it over now to Anna. Thank you, Anna.
The DEEP pilot program is a unique model to Kakuma as it combines the savings and loans group with the financial literacy training. Research demonstrates that long-term impacts require adding the literacy programs to savings group along with cash grants and entrepreneurial training. And since our target population are small business owners that participated in the Amala program, which is the Discover program, they've received that entrepreneurial training already. So we project that this program will be very effective. Also, this program allows participants to access loans internally within the savings group, which is also a new model to Kakuma. The benefits of the DEEP pilot program are promoting self-sufficiency through access to loans and capital accumulation. It supports individual business ventures, and it has the potential to strengthen the local market, which is projected to happen over multiple cycles of this program. It allows participants to further develop their financial skills, which in the future can lead to more informed financial decisions. And community savings and loans group are shown to increase employment opportunities and women's empowerment. And there are also household benefits as it strengthens a household's ability to withstand income fluctuations or shock through having access through the extra profits and savings. And the implementation costs to implement this program are relatively minimal in relation to the benefits that are generated by the members that participate. Next slide, please. The connection to environmental justice and sustainability. So this program directly promotes environmental justice as economic empowerment builds climatic resilience. This model is also responsive to climate constraints that limit agricultural product as it helps support other income generating activities that aren't related to agricultural pursuits. Additionally, access to financial markets safeguards food security during environmental and climatic shock. This program prioritizes sustainability. After the first initial cycle of the program, the pilot program, the group can function self-sufficiently with minimal trainer support. And they can continue the savings group for however long they decide. Members acquire critical financial literacy, which can lead to greater financial success in the future. And also, this program fosters an environment that encourages savings. In this age of funding cuts and increased vulnerability among populations facing war, poverty, food scarcity, and forced displacement, DEEP extends a hand of Harambe, which is a Swahili word and a Kenyan traditional value, meaning all put together. This value laid the philosophical foundation for our economic strengthening model that prioritizes social work values of self-determination and equity. DEEP is designed to bolster markets, enhance livelihoods, foster development that goes beyond capital, encompassing the well-being, flourishing, and environmental resilience of people, communities, families, and families. Thank you so much for your time, and we would love to hear any questions you all have.
All right. It was wonderful, particularly as instructor this past semester for Anna and Nicole. I was very excited to see this presentation and have you bring this to you. So we have about a minute for questions, and I do see Claire put a question in the chat. Any other questions beyond that, if you are just want to put them in the chat and answer them in the chat after this. Claire's question was, are you expecting one group participant leaders to be in Kakuma for the entirety of the pilot, or do you have an account for persons potentially relocating?
That's a great question. And I think that one of the things we have found in learning from multiple individuals working in this type of area with refugee populations, that it is essential for the trust of the local people. And so I think Seth and Joseph could speak best to the likelihood of people relocating, but I don't anticipate that if someone relocates, they would remain in the program. But Seth or Joseph, would either of you like to answer that?
Can you come back again? I didn't hear the question clearly.
Yes, the question is if someone begins in the community savings group and has to relocate away from Kakuma, what are we anticipating would happen in terms of those individuals participating in the group?
Yeah, first what I will say about relocating, mostly refugees who are relocating are being resettled, maybe one country abroad, so which means it's a success for them. But mostly we deal with those who are remaining here because the most passing challenges and problems that we are facing together here in Kakuma refugee camp. So we are not looking at those who are being relocating, we are looking at those who are living here in this harsh community, in this hard community, because someone being relocated, it means that maybe find a different way of surviving apart from here in Kakuma refugee camp. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you answering that question. And as I said, if there's any other questions, we'll ask folks just to put that in the chat for timing. Next up, we have Vanessa Marr. She will be presenting Rooted in Liberation, Reimagining Clinical Field Education as Eco-Womanist Practice.
Hi, and thank you, everyone. And yes, greetings from unceded Dakota land, also known as Minneapolis, Minnesota. Next slide, please. Just wanted to give a brief overview of what I'll be covering during this presentation, and just inviting you all just to experience a sense of grounding. I know that we have had a chance to, oh, thank you, love to you too. Yeah, just a chance to kind of get ourselves situated in the spirit of community, in the spirit of resilience, inviting you to just take a moment to remember, who we are, where we stand, and why this work matters now more than ever. I will be covering briefly the foundations of eco-womanism. In case any of you are not familiar with that concept, I'm happy to provide just a brief understanding of what that is. Also, I'll be talking about geographies of trauma, especially the combination of those social political forces and how they impact our internal landscapes. And as someone who specializes not only in clinical field practice, I also run a psychotherapy private practice. And so I get to experience this in the community as well as in the classroom through our field work. I'll also be talking about expanding the personal environment, that very popular theory that we love in social work, and how do we make that shift from that neutral backdrop of environment to more of that dynamic force. And then next, I'll talk about both the earth-body connection and clinical field education, as well as how do we come about that using a decolonized liberatory practice. And then lastly, that call to practice, like how do we deepen the roots in this work? I do also want to acknowledge that there will be references to state violence, death, and community trauma. And so if you're just not in a place to hear that, please give yourself permission to practice those energetic boundaries by stepping away or muting me when those are addressed. Next slide, please. And so for those foundations of eco-womanism, it is this shift from the start of like womanist spirituality, or what we've come to understand as womanist spirituality and Black feminist thought, more to that ecological liberation. Next slide. And so the question, of course, is what is it? And so it does emerge from that womanist spirituality. And so if you're familiar with Alice Walker's very famous definition in her book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, she defines it in a variety of ways. But one of my favorite lines from that definition is the liberation of an entire people, both male and female. And so how do we survive? How do we thrive together as a people? And so that is really the heartbeat of womanist spirituality or womanist liberation theology. Katie Cannon was very well known with her work in regards to that. And then, of course, that is also rooted in Black feminist thought. And so Patricia Hill Collins, Bell Hooks, many others, including Angela Davis. I wish I had more time to talk about them all, but those were some of the ones that are most salient in this field. The core claim in eco-womanism is that, the subjugation of women, people of color, and the natural world are not separate crises. They are not separate forms of oppression. They are the same. So if one is objectified, if one is exploited, they are all given the same treatment. They are all they are all determined less than or inferior in some way. And so that's the core thing. And so, so I was like, I got some choir members here, but yeah, so it is important to remember that this is all connected. It is all the same. And if we're looking at this through an intersectional lens, that, if we're looking at ecological justice, racial justice, gender equity, social liberation, we have to make sure that we see these as inextricably bound. Melanie Harris, the author of Eco-Womanism, she really emphasizes this, that you cannot separate these things at all, that these are things that we treat together. And so, yeah, I think we have someone needs to be muted. But thank you for joining us. So much love to you. That evolution of this work, it expands ecofeminism while, we are also now centering Blackness. And so very much in the same ways in which traditional feminism, especially the second wave of feminism, was popularized in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, more from that experience and perspective of white cisgender women. Same thing with regards to eco-womanism. It's not just central to, white cisgender women living in the United States who might have a certain class standing, usually middle class and above. It's like it is impacting women of color, that the environment, like especially environmental degradation, it is impacting women who represent the global South. So we have to expand our understanding about who is being impacted and who has voice in this movement. And so that's what eco-womanism is about. And then focusing on that collective care piece, that liberation is not individual. And it's like, I know we talk about self-care, especially those of us who do clinical work, but we cannot talk about it and not talk about how it is collectively tied. My liberation, my care is not the end goal. It is liberation for all. And that is all of creation, all that is living. And so we have to take that into consideration. Next slide, please. And so geographies of trauma, again, how those social political forces shape internal landscapes. On to the next slide. And I wanted to start out with Robert Talley's definition of those geographies of trauma, meaning the physical and social political landscapes that produce and perpetuate psychological harm, that these things are taking place that is causing harm internally to us. And of course, I'm going to use that case example. You might have heard of it, Operation Metro Surge here in the cities. It started in early December of 2025, and the official drawdown was in February of 2026, although we do know that they do have a presence still in the state of Minnesota. The most dramatic of that, the one that was most televised, was the presence of militarized U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as Customs and Border Patrol enforcement in the area. Augsburg University is in the heart of the largest Somali community in the state of Minnesota. And so that's Cedar Riverside, and their presence was here constantly and in South Minneapolis. So it was just an ongoing assault on our minds, bodies, our peace of mind, especially. And so that use of surveillance, displacement, and fear were environmental stressors. People could not leave their homes. Many of my students could not leave their homes because of the fear, because we do serve a large body of immigrant students as well as students of color across all areas. With regards to environmental racism, there was toxic exposure, especially with the use of chemical irritants, such as tear gas. They use even like noise weaponry. So there were times when they would just use like these sound pulses that would hurt eardrums for those who were out on the streets protesting or trying to track their activity using their cell phones. You could be just walking in the street and be considered a threat. And so it was pretty intense. And so ecological degradation, I mean, they were not trained to pick up after themselves. We can just say that, just to use a little levity here. They did leave a lot of trash, and they didn't care, and they were fine with, busting out some windows, and they were fine with knocking things over because they did not show respect for the land or the communities that they were working in, for obvious reasons, because their goal was to engage in displacement, using mass deportation as the weapon of choice, as well as physical violence, especially on immigrant, Black, Brown, and Indigenous community members. Now, I want to make sure that we understand that they did not stop there. And to Resma Minicum's note and his assertion that when we talk about white supremacy, that we're not just talking about targeted groups here. Of course, that is one of the big ways that it's done, but it was also the ways in which white US citizens were targeted because it went against what their goal was, what their quote mission was. And so when we talk about white supremacy harming everybody, including individuals who are white-bodied, that is exactly what happened here. Exactly, yeah, dying of whiteness, 100%. And so, that resource displacement and cultural erasure was also one of the tactics that was used. The loss of community anchors, including parks, gathering areas, like some people would like to congregate outside their houses of worship, outside, stores, sacred spaces, like those were gone. And, and as a result, it was severing the restorative earth-body relationship, that they could no longer feel their feet touching the ground beneath them and supporting them. They could no longer, just be thankful, even though, I mean, yes, our winters here are pretty harsh, but, to be able to engage in all of our senses outside, even in the midst of winter, that was taken away from us. For some wisdom traditions, they practice, just celebrating all of the seasons, and that was taken as well. I also want to acknowledge what I refer to as grieving grounds, that the memorials that were constructed for community members, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, who were murdered this winter, they are literally 1.5 miles apart from each other. And both of those spaces were less than a mile from George Floyd Square. And so we're coming up on the 6th anniversary of his murder. And so all of these are all taking place. I call that also the triangulation of grief. Like it's all within a mile and a half of this section of South Minneapolis where I live near. I'm pretty close to all of 3 of these spaces. And they serve as daily reminders of state-sanctioned violence and collective grief. And so even as we are walking outside again, even as we are trying to reclaim that space to be free, we are constantly reminded that these things happen and they can happen again. Next slide, please. And so let's talk about the impact in the classroom. Again, I teach a field seminar. In fact, I am the course lead for our anti-oppressive clinical practice track at Augsburg. And so not only am I also navigating all that the students are experiencing, because they are in fact embodied witnesses to this. They are at home trying to protect their own families. They're trying to keep themselves safe. They were also going out to their field placements, and they had to protect the communities that they were serving and having them stay safe as much as they could. Of course, they had limitations because as students, we want to make sure that they are protected as much as possible. So we weren't asking them to go out on patrols, for instance, but we would have them, sign on online if they could work with their populations in that way. And so they were embodying their own geopolitical struggles. Many of our students are immigrant students. And so they were already coming from some places that were traumatizing for them. They felt a sense of safety, relative safety here, until all of this happened. And so they had to revisit that and be re-traumatized in those ways. And so the call is here for supervision to hold space for this, to hold space for those embodied processes. There is that vicarious and secondary traumatic stress, again, referring to Menachem, that this exposure to systemic oppression is not neutral. It does add up. It adds up across generations, and it's adding up more acutely as it's going on the ground. There is the dual wound that students and clients from marginalized communities, they're going to experience both that personal trauma that they're walking around with and have been carrying in their bones for generations, and that ongoing structural violence at the same time. And so again, calling for space. Oh, we have 5 minutes. Okay. I knew it was a lot to cover. So again, making sure that field supervision as a political space where we're placing students and asking them to bear witness and whether to name that power, we have to make sure that we engage in that. And then that practice implication that supervisors must create space to process the social political as a clinical variable. It's not just background noise. And so we can advance that a few more slides. We can go to expanding the personal environment. Again, I'm going to address here that eco-womanist expansion, that we move from personal environment only as this neutral thing, but it's that force that carries history, violence, and medicine. It is a path towards healing. And that land is an actor, that it's a relationship. And so displacement from land is a detachment from oneself. And so we want to try to find ways to integrate that as much as possible, especially when we are working on clinical assessments. Let's talk about the ways in which we can use case conceptualization as a way to introduce our understanding of the environment, our understanding of ecology, both historically and currently. And we can advance that a few more slides. Let's see, I'm just looking here. Let's look at like those somatic and place-based interventions with regards to the earth body practice. using that classroom as site implications. And so let's think about how can we combine the work of field faculty and supervisors so that we can model interventions such as, where does the client feel safe? Where do you as the intern feel safe, and what is needed in order for us to feel safe in this work? Moving away from those Eurocentric models of clinical practice, the more individualized, office-bound, deficit-focused clinical frameworks. Let's move that away and think about how can we build more empowered spaces to learn. How do we engage in spiritualities such as those that are rooted in womanist and indigenous practices? Like, how do we invite people literally to go to the river or the forest or the garden to hold themselves, to help them feel connected and supported? Go to the next slide, please. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wanted to show this. It's a beautiful quote. When we drop fear, we can draw nearer to people, draw nearer to the earth, and draw nearer to all the heavenly creatures that surround us. We can go to the next slide. Thank you, Bell Hooks. These were just a few examples of how the land was being used to actually protest. And that slide with the deer there on the right, I mean, that's Fort Snelling. That was where base of operations was for Operation Metro Surge. And so to see that that land was being reclaimed by nature was also empowering to see. Next slide, please. And then onward to that decolonized liberatory practice. Again, let's look just not as this vehicle for intervention, but let's, again, build that relationship with the client, with community, land, ancestors, in the sacred as the medium for healing itself. And bridging that gap, for social workers, please move fluidly between direct clinical intervention and intersectional ecological advocacy as part of one continuum. All right, next slide, please. Again, focusing on the relationship as healing justice. Here are some ways to think about it in terms of supervision. Again, naming the land, the policy, and the powers that inform our relationships to ecology. Let's talk about ways in which we can assign eco-womanist and decolonized healing text alongside traditional clinical frameworks. So instead of referring to all the dead white guys, there are some wonderful ways in which we can learn this. I give the example of Decolonizing Therapy by Jennifer Mullen as an example. That's one of my core texts in my classes. Again, talking about, how are we embodying our own geopolitical realities and inviting students to share that as well. Next slide, please. And then here, lastly, is the call to practice, expanding person environment to include the land, the economy of place, and encouraging students to do some community asset mapping of their field placements so that they can have a deeper understanding of those experiences. Of validating indigenous and womanist spiritualities as legitimate therapeutic epistemologies and ways of knowing, training students to bridge that clinical intervention with intersectional and ecological advocacy, honoring the sanctity of the person and the planet, as well as integrating rituals to promote emotional and spiritual well-being. This past week, that's why my voice is really raw, we've had 2 graduation ceremonies, and one of them was for our MSW clinical students, inviting friends and family members to actually go on stage and hood them, and to celebrate together as a community of practice that we did this together. And so thank you so much. I do apologize for running over time. I had a lot to share, but please feel free to refer to the discussion prompts. But they're there for you to hold. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Vanessa. You were getting so many notes of gratitude and expansive mindsets that you've added to today. I really did appreciate all of that. I think what we've heard across a lot of the presentations has been this just real commitment to, and a recommitment continually, right? To showing up in the ways that we can and kind of being more expansive in the way that we perceive the connection between social and environmental injustices. And you did a wonderful job highlighting that. So I thank you so much. We will not have time for questions for you, but if folks do have questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat, and Vanessa can answer them there. And then we are going to move into our break moments now. And we'll be breaking until, let me just double check timing. We will have our break until around 1 o'clock. So thank you again to all of our presenters so far, and we will see you shortly.
Olive. If this is a story about our islands, it is a story for the whole world.
Protect our land from the pollution. Hold my hand, let's find a solution. Hey, it's not an illusion. Hey, this is a movement.
I am proud of my home and my culture. I get to sing and dance, drum with friends.
Drumming, singing by the ocean and the water. It makes me feel great when I'm on the land walking. Hear the owls talking, hear the owls speak. Always find my peace when I'm chilling by the beach.
I find peace at my dad's house. I want to make my home and my family proud. Where I'm from might be a little place, but we keep it charged like batteries, AAA.
North Shore, where you put us in a small space. We'll fight to get our land back. This is our soundtrack.
In the snowy mountains where it's cold and crisp, I'm trying to make you see like an optometrist. Because my language and culture is out of focus, but you never cut me down like you did the forest.
Protect our land from the pollution. Hold my hand, let's find the solution. Hey, it's not an illusion. Hey, this is a movement.
My knowledge is heavy, my nation is deadly. But all I wanna know is if the panic is ready.
I'll tell you what's in my mind. I don't like the pipeline. Get the oil out, the water is our lifeline.
They stole our land, we want it back. We're proud of our culture, our language too. We follow steps our elders do. We like weaving together. We learn and get better. When we make mistakes, we help each other.
All right, welcoming you all back. We're into now just about our final hour together. This has been really incredible in so many ways. For me personally, I always get so much out of the conference in terms of feeling connected again, revitalized and grateful. So thank you all for your time and your energy, and especially to our fabulous collection of presenters today. Bringing us back into our next 20-minute sessions, I'd like to please welcome up our next group, talking about Climate Gen, an assessment of the impact of climate change on gender inequality in Spain. And once again, I'm very grateful for this year's global perspectives. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Fernando Relinque. I'm from Seville, a city in the south of Spain, and I'm a professor at the Pablo de Olavide University in Seville. I was going to give this presentation with my colleague Raquel Garcia, but due to a family issue, she couldn't be here today. Before starting, I would like to apologize for my English, especially for my pronunciation. I promise I will do my best, and I also promise that the project that I'm going to present is better than my accent. I'm really delighted to take part in this conference. It's a great opportunity for me to be here to share our work and also to learn from the excellent presentation and discussions I am listening today. Today I'm going to talk about Climagen. It's a research project about climate change and gender inequality in Spain. This project has been funded by the Spanish Institute for Women under the Ministry of Equality, and it has been developed between 2024 and 2026. The main idea of the project is very clear. Climate change doesn't affect all people in the same way. Its effects depend on social conditions, they depend on income, employment, housing, health, access to service, and also on gender inequality. So in this project, we ask a simple but important question. Can climate change increase gender inequality in Spain? And more specifically, in which territories can this risk be higher? No? We want to show with data how climate change will affect gender inequality using territorialized data to support political decision making in our country. So what is Climagen? Climagen is a research project that studies the relationship between climate change, gender inequality, and territory. We don't understand climate change only as an environmental problem. Of course, climate change is about temperature, droughts, heat waves, and extreme weather events. But it's also a social problem. Why? Because people don't have the same resources to respond to climate change. For example, a heat wave doesn't affect everybody in the same way. It can be more dangerous for older people, for people with low income, for people living in poor housing conditions, or for women who have Medicare responsibilities. So our project tries to understand how climate change can make existing gender inequalities worse. To do this, we create the Climagen Index. This index allows us to compare different territories in Spain, regions, provinces, and municipalities. Can put the next slide, please. Next.
I apologize.
Next.
Yes, I'm so sorry. The slide deck froze, so we're just going to re-upload it. I'm so sorry about this.
Okay.
You can keep talking. This might be a
Okay.
Sorry about
Perfect.
that.
No problem. The main results of the project is the climate change index, as I said. This index includes 56 indicators. These indicators are organized in different areas. For example, environment, demography, economy, employment, education, family and care, health, technology, and housing. So the index doesn't look only at one dimension. No? It gives us a broader picture of gender inequality and climate vulnerability. The process to build the index had several steps. First, we reviewed scientific literature, more than 800 publications about climate change, gender, and social vulnerability. Second, we select indicators that were useful and available in public data resources, databases. Third, I'm going for the third slide. Thank you. Third, expert help. We select indicators, and third, expert helped us validate the indicators. And next, we use multi-criteria decision or MCDA, a participatory method to give weight to the indicator, because not all indicators have the same importance. So we asked experts and social actors to help us decide their relative importance. Once we had defined the 56 indicator and the relative weight of each one, we extract the data for each of Spain's municipality, more than 8,000 municipalities in Spain. We extract the data from Spanish and European public databases. For this reason, climate change is not only a technical tool, it's also a participatory tool, and it combines scientific evidence, expert knowledge, and social experience. Next slide, please. These slides show the project impact of climate change in Europe in the next years, next decades, using information from Climate Adapt, is a European database. As we can see, Spain is one of the European countries where climate change can have very strong effects. In Spain, we expect in the next years more heat waves, higher temperatures, droughts, water scarcity, and extreme climate events. They are happening yet in real territories, and these territories already have social problems, inequalities, and different level of vulnerability. So in climate change, we don't ask only where will climate change be stronger in Spain, we also ask where can climate change increase gender inequality. This is the main contribution of our project. Next slide, please. The Climate Change Index reveals the geographical distribution of gender inequality risk related to climate change in Spain. One of the main findings is that the risk is not equally distributed. In the chart, you can see each column is each province on Spain, and the red columns are province where the inequality is harder for women than for the men. Some territories show higher levels of risks than others. The Climate Change Index shows a clear territorial pattern. Higher risks are concentrated in part of the interior of Spain, the northwest, and some areas of the south of Spain. Many of these territories have similar characteristics. They often have aging population, depopulation, fewer public services, weaker labor markets, and more socially vulnerability. This is very important for social work and public policy because it shows that gender inequality cannot be understood only at the national level. We need to look at territories, no? A very local focus. Next slide, please. Can you understand the accent of my pronunciation, more or less? Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. This slide shows gender inequality in extreme poverty. You know, red column, or each column is each province. And the results very clear. Spain has 52 provinces, and in 44 of them, extreme poverty affects women more than men. This doesn't mean that the difference is always very large, but it's very solid. No, in many provinces the difference is small, but the important point is that this pattern appears in almost all the country. So extreme poverty has a gender dimension, and we can demonstrate with data. No, and this is very important when we talk about climate change. Why? Because people living in poverty have fewer resources to adapt to climate risk. For example, they may have more difficulty paying for energy, improving their homes, using transport, or protecting themselves during heat waves. So if women are more affected by extreme poverty in most provinces, climate change can increase this inequality. No? Next slide, please. Here you can see the gender inequality in education. The graph compares different levels of education between women and men. What we can see is that in many territories, more men than women have complete secondary and higher education, and at the same time, more women than men have only reached a primary education. Again, these differences are not always very large, but they are present in many territories. It's important because education is connected with employment, income, access to information, participation, and decision making. In the context of climate change, education also affects to the capacity to adapt. Next slide, please. This is the more clear. The slide put focus on care for dependent people. Here, the result is especially important. In every province, Spanish provinces, care responsibilities for dependent people fall more on women than on men. The differences are not always very large, but the pattern is present everywhere. And this means that care is one of the most constant forms of gender inequality in Spain. And it's very relevant for climate change because, for example, during heat waves, older people, children, and dependent people may need more attention and support. During water crisis or extreme weather events, daily life become more difficult and care work become more intense. If women already carry more responsibility for care, climate change can increase this burden. Next slide, please. These slides summarize some of the main vulnerability patterns that we found. First, we identified critical hotspots. These are municipalities with higher level of inequality than nearby areas. Many of them are rural, aging, and have fewer services. Second, we found that the south of the interior of Spain show some of the highest level of impact because in these areas, climate risk such heat waves, droughts, and water scarcity combine with fragile social and economic condition. Third, we identify what we call double vulnerability territories. These are places with two problems at the same time, with high gender inequality and high climate exposure. These territories should be a priority for public policy. Finally, we also found that new inequalities can appear in more dynamic areas, including metropolitan regions. In cities, climate change can interact with housing problems, energy poverty, transport, and sustainability, also sustainable mobility. Next slide, please. Here you can see the central message of the project. Climate change acts as inequality multiplier. This means that climate change doesn't create inequality from nothing. Instead, it makes existing inequalities worse. No? If a territory already has poverty, weak public services, aging population, gender inequality, or poor housing condition, climate change can increase this problem. No? In the project, we analyze different future scenarios from 2040, 2070, and 2100. In almost all territories, the climate change index increase in the future, but the increase is stronger in territories that already have higher structural vulnerability, social structural vulnerability. This is why prevention is so important. I don't know if you can click the button "Explore GM." In the next slide, the button, yes, you can. I don't know if it functions or not. Yes, this is the web of the project. Here, can you click on the button, pink button, ir al mapa? No, in the web. Yes, you can see. I'm going to put in the chat the link. Can you enter? Here you can see the risk, all the each municipalities, more than 8,000 has their punctuation about the inequality, no? And you can see how the center of the country has the principal social and inequality gender inequality problems. Okay, thank you. If you can return to the presentation. I'm going to put the link in the chat, and you can see it if you want. If you can put the next slide. Thank you. Conclusion. To conclude, I would like to highlight four main ideas. First, gender inequality in Spain has a strong territorial dimension. It's not distributed equally across the country. It's more intense in some territories, specifically those with aging population, fewer services, and more socio-economic fragility. Second, climate change can increase existing inequalities. The most vulnerable territories are often also more exposed to climate risk. This creates situation of double vulnerability. We cannot analyze gender inequality only through income or employment. We also need to include care, health, housing, demography, public services, access to resources. For climate change provides evidence for action. No? It helps identify priority territories and support gender-sensitive climate policies. For social work, I think this is especially important because it connects three key ideas: environmental justice, social justice, and gender inequality. Thank you very much for your attention. I will be happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Fernando, this was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. You did really excellent work, and we're grateful for your contributions. There are already some chats and questions and comments for you, but I do unfortunately for this presentation, excited for the next presentation, have to move us along. But thank you again. We're grateful for your time and your effort for this excellent presentation. Next up, we're going to be learning from Rebecca Matthew, Journeying Through Earth Grief to the Solidarity Economy. Thank you, Rebecca. Welcome.
Hi, welcome everybody. I think I'm going to share my slides. Correct, Renee?
Yep, go ahead. You should be all set.
Okay.
Okay. Let me know if you're not. All right, good. Looks like we can.
Can you see me?
Yep, we can see.
We can see. Okay.
Yep, we can see everything.
Okay. Perfect. I'll get started. So thank you, everybody. My apologies for arriving late. We just had our commencement. So off with the robe, and here I am. So just really quickly, my hope today is to have a little bit of a short story as we kind of move into this kind of somewhat embodied process of navigating Earth grief as we kind of move towards and look towards the solidarity economy. So I'm going to start off with just a short story, if you will, a pretty short one. Her tiny hand in mine, we walk along the sidewalk heading home on a fall afternoon. We're grateful for the sun's warmth upon our shoulders, chipmunks flitting about the trees and the neighborhood cat rolling in the sun, blissfully oblivious to passers-by. She begins to skip as she often does, sharing a cascade of thoughts sliding effortlessly from magic potions and dragons to how much she loves persimmons. As we crest a small hill, we see yet another majestic pecan tree cut down in the name of maintaining property value. Wood chips and dust cover the road like a crime scene, yet no one stops. In my paralysis of not knowing what to do or say, she lets go of my hand and runs to the tree, wrapping her arms around what is left of a dear friend. A friend she had climbed and admired so often, a friend that had provided habitat and shade for countless birds and selflessly offered nourishment to people and animals alike. After some time, she returned with tear-stained cheeks, uttering softly, "I had to say I was sorry." In that moment, my then 6-year-old child did not talk about her experience with nostalgia or any of the other language that we're using now to describe all of our feelings around what is happening to Earth. She felt it, and she responded intuitively with love. And so how do we navigate this kind of grief? What are our responses to that? Many of us experience fear, anxiety, grief, sorrow, despair, debilitating overwhelm. And we're seeing increasingly so prestigious universities and many scholars conducting research and developing resources to cultivate our capacities to quote unquote cope or manage these feelings. And what I argue is that although helpful to varying degrees, I and others feel that they may limit our ability to respond as we must. And in that process, we're often very rarely invited to feel deeply the impacts of environmental devastation. And I'm reminded of Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh and his works. In so doing, we're able to hear the cries of earth that remind us of our interconnectedness. And so in 2022, Stephen Herod Buhner wrote a book, Earth Grief, The Journey Into and Through Ecological Loss. And he reminds us that such feelings are not the problem. Despite the soul-shattering impact of these feelings, they are symptoms of the problem. And it's the problem itself that we must face if we wish to address the crisis of our times. And so I'm going to invite us to kind of refresh ourselves. I suspect earlier in the day, many people may have referred to this. Our prior presenter, which was phenomenal, really highlighted what's happening in España. And so I want to kind of review a little bit of that so that we can kind of embody what our Earth is experiencing right now. So much of this, many of you are very much familiar with and probably use in your own research and elsewhere. So as you know, 2023 IPCC, very high confidence that climate change is a threat to human well-being and planetary health, resulting in, I quote, a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future for all. The 2024 State of the Planet report, we are on the brink of an irreversible climate disaster. Lenton and colleagues, 2023, some of the leading researchers in research around tipping points, notes that 5 are at risk of being crossed, with 3 more threatened in 2030s as the world warms, which we just heard about in our prior presentation, which when crossed, I quote, will severely damage our planet's life support systems and threaten the stability of our societies. Stay with me. Rees, a leading scholar in the work of overshoots, suggests that ocean acidification, soil and land erosion, ecological refugees, biodiversity loss, fish stock collapse, food shortages are a symptom of overshoot, by which I mean and they mean we are depleting our Earth's resources faster than they are being replenished. And that is driven by consumption and population growth. And in 2024, the Living Planet report notes a catastrophic 73% decline in the average size of monitored wildlife populations since 1970. I suspect that many of us are feeling a lot of earth grief right now. Fear, anxiety, overwhelm. I suspect you're feeling it in your bodies. I know I am. It is really hard to witness this. It's very hard to hear this research. It's very hard to see the devastation that's happening in our natural world and the impacts that's having on all of the species that inhabit this planet. And so what I argue and others is that there's often, increasingly so, this attempt to this approach with respect to psychopathology, that we want to diagnose this. We want to look at eco-anxiety. We want to look at eco-depression. We want to come up with words like solastalgia, right? And what others, Joanna Macy and Johnstone, suggest that by doing so, it obfuscates our radical interconnectedness with the natural world. And instead, what if we begin and really center that this is an absolutely natural response to what we are experiencing as sentient beings in this planet at this moment? And that if we can move into that and we can move into all of those feelings, that we begin to delve deeper and we really want to identify the etiology of what's happening, right? And by doing so, we have the possibility of re-inhabiting our interbeing with the natural world, as suggested by Buhner. And so part of that work is really thinking about this consciousness raising, this shifting in our perspectives and worldviews, and thinking about indigenous and non-dominant worldviews as we do so. So again, with calling on Celtic wisdom traditions, Irish poet, priest, and philosopher John O'Donohue reminds us that the Celtic mind did not separate what belongs together. The inner friendship that embraces nature, divinity, underworld, and humans as one. Similarly, I saw in prior presentations, people were talking about Khmer. And as a scientist, author, and member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, Robin Wall Khmer views our natural world as kin and wise teacher. And so I think as we move through that earth grief and we start to seek out these alternative worldviews and ways of being in and with the world, being in community with each other and our natural world, that it facilitates a recognition that to be in good relationship with the natural world, engaging with care and attention, restraint and cooperation, reciprocity and gratitude, that doing so is fundamentally incommensurable with capitalism. Again, this idea of wanting to identify the etiology. As Khmer describes, capitalism, and I quote, grinds what is beautiful and unique into dollars, converts gifts to commodities in a currency that enables us to purchase things we don't really need while destroying what we do, and will thus forever be an engine of extinction. And as such, she begs the question, when an economic system actively destroys what we love, isn't it time for a different system? And so there are many people working around the globe right now, not just theorizing, but putting into practice many alternative economies. I'm going to present just one today, which in many ways is an umbrella as part of a larger solidarity economy movement. But the solidarity economy has been defined by Quiñones as a socioeconomic order and new way of life that deliberately chooses serving the needs of people and ecological sustainability as the goal of economic activity, rather than the maximization of profits under the unfettered rule of the market. And so in response, and this emerges, this kind of solidarity economy movement, it emerges in 1980s in Chile and in France, is further galvanized by the WTO protests in Seattle in 1999, and really begins to take center stage at the World Social Forum, the first World Social Forum in Brazil in 2001. So this work has been building for quite some time now. The U.S. Solidarity Economy Network lays out the 5 guiding principles and values of this work: solidarity, equity in all dimensions, democracy in politics, work, and community, kind of an protagonistic, and participatory democracy, sustainability, embracing the rights of Mother Earth, and pluralism, a recognition that this isn't going to look the same in every place. It's going to adapt and take shape and form based on history, context, culture, etc. So these being the guiding principles versus profit maximization. And so breathing life into those, the solidarity economy and the work that people are doing are really thinking about the ways we consume, the ways we produce, the ways we redistribute surplus. And so this is a graphic that just kind of gives you a lot of these ideas. And I think it's really important to remember that many of these practices and policies are not necessarily new. They're very ancestral. When we look at rotating savings clubs and susus, and when we look at regenerative farming, these are practices that we have known as a species since our inception. And so in some ways it's a returning back, as well as new innovative approaches as well. So when we think about recommoning, people are thinking about the commons not only with respect to land, but also with respect to technology, the internet, etc. So these are some of the practices that really bring to life those values. And so with respect to care for each other, just a couple of quick examples. What is centered there is relationships, relationality, particularly in social work, in the in the social service sector. Particularly given that in the wake of neoliberalism, those services have become increasingly privatized. We see this kind of counter shift and within the solidarity economy, people saying there are a lot of problems with these things being transactionally delivered and provided, and we want to center relationships. So within that space, we see a lot of worker-owned cooperatives. We see a lot of social care cooperatives or multi-stakeholder cooperatives, where people are able to prioritize quality care and dignified labor. Also in caring for each other, time banking, needs and offers markets. And I would argue, and others would argue, in this sector, it's really important to remember that cooperatives have always been really instrumental in this work. And as John Rostakis invites us here, cooperatives remain a constant reminder that there are other more humane ways of understanding and practicing economics in the service of social values. I would argue that cooperatives are the bedrock of the solidarity economy. When we think about care for the land, I've mentioned this, but organic and regenerative farming and ranching, agroecology and permaculture, thinking about the rise right now about genetically modified and privately patented seeds. pushing against that, thinking about how are we collecting and sharing and saving seeds as we've done for millennia via seed banks, etc. How do we lend tools and share tools? How do we engage in mutual aid? How do we go about the work of reclaiming and recommoning commonly held land and stewarded land? And so this is building, the movement continues to build, as I've said, for more than a couple of decades now in communities here in the United States. Some examples are Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, Native Roots in California, community movement builders in Georgia and other places, Cooperation Jackson. And these are communities that are trying to fundamentally restructure their local ecosystems, their economic and lived ecosystems that are embodying many of the practices within the solidarity economy. Because of the impact that they're having socially, economically, environmentally, etc., many international organizations are getting very, very interested in the solidarity economy. OECD, International Labor Organization, United Nations, providing trainings, funding, etc. And we even see nation states, right? Ecuador and Bolivia as two examples that are trying to write into their constitutions things like the rights of Mother Earth, thinking about providing line item budgets for funding for solidarity economy initiatives. So the movement continues to include several organizations. That's the U.S. Solidarity Economy Network, RIPES is an international solidarity economy group, and several other. There are many more. I just chose to include these as examples of people that are really starting, as Audre Lorde suggests, to move beyond our immediate ideals and vision alternatives. So I offer those as examples. And so part of what I would argue in my few minutes left, I haven't kept the time, but really inviting people to think about developing an alternative lexicon. If we're going to move away from capitalism and start to embrace alternative economic systems and the social and economic and environmental impacts thereof, we need to think about the language that we're using. Language, reproduce our cultural understanding and our cultural imaginary. So thinking about the ways in which we can kind of move back from this entrepreneurial spirit and individualism in the market and start thinking about not only the language, but also the practice of reciprocity, interdependence, mutual responsibility, and dare I say love. And so again, these kind of thinking about how these non-dominant worldviews really help us, buen vivir, vivir bien, summa causa. These are sayings that really are central to other places, and they're understood of ways of living in accord with people and the planet. Khmer calls for a grammar of intimacy. This may have been touched on earlier in some of the presentations. But by that, she means that we come to see, communicate, learn from, and interact with soil, plants, trees, rocks, and animals, not as it, but as kin, with the responsibilities that brings. She has a great line. She says, if a maple isn't it, we can take up the chainsaw. If the maple is a her, we think twice. And so I'll conclude by saying that we find ourselves at a crossroads. We can continue with business as usual, as suggested by Buhner, until, quote, Earth does finally make us stop the modulation of hydrocarbons one way or another, leading to civilization collapse. Or we can seek out and build economic alternatives and reaffirm our interdependence with each other and the natural world with everything we have left. Thank you. Okay. Let me see if I can come back here. Oh. There we go. Okay. There we have it. I'm sorry I couldn't, while I was presenting with my slides, I couldn't see anything in the chat. So forgive me if yes, forgive me.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think you did a really powerful job of framing the need for codependence and reciprocity.
Yeah.
Kinship is just such a piece that I'm a proponent for linguistic justice, and I think by framing it the way that you did, you really shifted from that kind of place of grief and powerlessness to how can we move forward from that, which I think has been a very consistent theme between a lot of the presentations today.
Yeah.
So I thank you, and I definitely value your time with us.
Thank you. Thanks.
So we are going to move to our final presentation. So this actually fits really well with Rebecca's content as well. So we'll be hearing from two folks who will be talking about where climate psychology falls short and the ways in which we can provide frontline community mental health for those who are affected by climate change.
Hey y'all, it's wonderful to be with you. And yes, Robin and I are going to be digging into where climate psychology falls short, and then the work that we're doing in our region to support folks through the People Over Petro Coalition. And so we're excited to dive into that. And if you don't mind going to the next slide. Beautiful. So a little bit about me. My name's Bailey. I use she, her pronouns. I'm based in Central Ohio, and I'm a community-based social worker, an ecological grief researcher, and practitioner. And so a lot of my work the last few years have been with the People Over Petro Coalition, working in our region, to serve our neighbors and ourselves who are directly impacted by petrochemical violence. And I'm really excited to be here with Robin, who is another colleague in that coalition and doing beautiful work. And I'll hand it over to you, Robin.
Oh, thank you so much, Bailey. It's so great to see everyone. This has just been this whole day and presentation experience. It has been such a homecoming because I started my journey in environmentalism with environmental psychology, eco-psychology, and trauma work. And then I switched careers to go into organizing to specifically apply these trauma-informed organizing principles and to come back to it all now and to synthesize it is something really beautiful. So very grateful to be here. I just want to actually dive in and talk a little bit more about People Over Petro Coalition, also known as POPCO. So if we could just go to one more slide over. And my apologies for not having graphics for the two regions I'm about to talk about because I will wax poetic and we will never get out of here on time. So what I just want to talk about first is the Ohio River Valley and then also Appalachia. The Ohio River Valley, Ohio means Ohio, means good river in Iroquois or the Haudenosaunee language. It's a region that is geographically and historically significant surrounding our 981 Ohio River. So that spans parts of Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. But it also encompasses another giant part. Hi, Pittsburgh friend. Yes. Appalachia. And both the Ohio River Valley and Appalachia are two regions deeply affected by historical extraction, the constant barrage of the creative marketing of the petrochemical industry, and the nonstop pacing of reacting to the petrochemical industry disasters that leave us little to no time to grieve, and then getting our game face back on and heading into the trenches for the next man-made or natural disaster that we are now seeing are actually ultimately man-made as well. So POPCO is a regionally united front to stop and reverse the planned expansion of the plastic and petrochemical industries. This includes supporting our member organizations, which I have shown there are 50 plus. We have close to 60 now, and we are ever growing. So if you're ever interested, we'll have links later on how you can join, enjoy, and explore our work. We are also committed to the workers of our member organizations who oftentimes work with limited resources, long hours, experience vicarious trauma and moral injury, and lack of healthcare resources, and now more than ever. Throughout its inception since 2017, we have gathered along the way a lot of strengths and some shortcomings, but I really want to celebrate the strengths right now that we have gotten through POPCO. Through many of our members, our national organizations, we have been dedicated to making sure that the work remains place-based and hyper-regional, because this ensures that the campaigns are community-led rather than trying to fit into like a broader national narrative that oftentimes rings hollow to local experiences and needs. Movements like this are built for the community by the community. so that we are validating the immediate experience and shape the legacy of protection and healing as we continue to put people over profits rather than the other way around, as we are seeing so much in life. And that the sense of place and placemaking is formed by all inhabitants of a space, no matter what species, how many legs or no legs, if you're flying or not. This is how we have our sense of place and placemaking. It is not dictated by an industry. Further showing our dedication to the myriad of issues that are happening in our region and nationally and globally, we have our work dedicated into specific working groups such as plastics and plastic making, chemical recycling, fracking and the infrastructure surrounding that, disaster preparedness, and now data centers, which are just a whole other animal. And I know that so many of us have been touched by it, or we will be soon enough, and that's why we're all together in this space as well. Additionally, to making sure that we stay hyper-local and specific, we have very relevant resources. We have a public-facing resource list that includes essential links for understanding the oil and gas infrastructure and the industry itself. Gas and petrochemical infrastructure mapping tools to really get a sense of what's happening near you and in the broader scope of things as well. We focus on activist toolkits that are poised to give education, organizing training, and how to contact your elected officials to hit all the major points of power and empowerment in a community. But we also have a coalition member-specific resource hub. So when you are joined as a member, you can access some hyper-specific things and then also have some groups to really kind of hone in and feel that sense of collective care. Speaking of collective care, we're going to mention more of what's working with our efforts on that in this presentation, but I would love to turn the screen over to Bailey, who's going to be calling us in to recognize some of the things that have not been as helpful to frontline communities in our climate psychology work and activists, and how we can learn from this to better serve and support. So whenever you're ready, Bailey, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for helping us land in place. I really appreciate you, Robin. And so Robin and I are both, I'm a social worker. Robin has that background in counseling and eco-psychology. And so as we were welcomed into the POPCO coalition, one of the skills that we wanted to offer was our support in mental health. And so that work started, really back in 2020, but 2021, we started more dedicated efforts around mental health and collective well-being support. And because my background was more in climate psychology, I was focused on ecological grief, climate anxiety, some of these language that Rebecca was beautifully describing that we're looking for to measure and describe these universal experiences, but they're very different depending on where you live and what you see when you walk out your door. And so I want to say this was an abundance of love for the climate psychologists who have guided me, who have supported our coalition. But sometimes there can be a false dichotomy that we find between industry disasters and weather-related disasters, even though we know the building blocks to those disasters, all start with oil and gas and industry harm. But there can be this false dichotomy between what is an industry disaster and what is a climate disaster, so those more overt weather experiences. But then also we find that there can be sometimes a gap in which we're pursuing sustainability or climate change and climate action, but we're leaving out environmental justice. And when we leave out environmental justice, it's not true climate justice work, and it will never be, what sets us free. And so what we found is language like climate anxiety, solastalgia, eco-depression, they weren't landing for folks, and folks that were trained in those focuses were really missing the realities of what does it look like to live right next to a polluting industry, right next to a plastic plant, right next to an incinerator, right next to a data center. And so we were missing what that lived experience was like, and we were also missing what it's like to work around that. And if you are both living and working around polluting industries, it's that nonstop chronic stress and harm that doesn't match our seasonal stressors. And so we found that that language really wasn't meeting our coalition members and the residents we were serving where we were. And we had that replicated in experiences where we were linking to climate aware therapists. And there can just be this knowledge gap if you're not rooted in a place in which folks might not be familiar with the harms and the safety and violence considerations of organizing in social movements. And there was a lot of invalidation in which we would do resource linkage. We would link someone in our coalition with a climate aware therapist. And over again, I heard this story of they just didn't believe me when I was talking about being stalked by an oil and gas professional. They didn't believe that this level of harassment would work. They didn't believe that the police really, didn't support me in the way that we thought they should, or that the government would allow this to happen. And I think, folks that are from our region who have experienced historical harm that builds and builds and builds to the harms we have today, like that's very known of we likely aren't going to get the support and safety we deserve, and that it's a high risk behavior to be an organizer and to speak up for yourself and your community. But that experience wasn't being validated in therapy. And I think it was largely a place-based challenge of a lot of the folks we were referring to weren't in our region because we didn't have folks self-identifying as climate aware therapists in our region as much then. That number is growing all the time. The other challenge was the individual action fallacy that we all fall into. And there's, of course, power in individual action, just like with individual climate action. There is power in our movements and being values aligned and, and engaging in the world in the way that we want to. And also, we can't individual action our way out of the chronic stress and lack of safety when you're living next to a polluting industry. An individual action, whether it was linking someone with a climate aware therapist or it was psychoeducation or other trainings that we providing, that individual action was asked for. People were looking for private resources, but it wasn't moving metrics when we were doing, annual check-ins and surveys of are you feeling supported and safe and cared for in our coalition. The individual actions weren't having the impact we were hoping and keeping our community safe and well. And so again, that's with an abundance of love to climate psychology, but it wasn't meeting the environmental justice realities and mental health needs that arose in organizing for us. And I'll pass it over to you, Robin, to talk more about what those stressors are.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Bailey. So to continue our dedication and service to our POPCO members, POPCO had sent out a survey in 2023 and 2025 during our latest convening to see what are the, like we said, the unique challenges and stressors that our members are facing. And here we have a little word block here to show what has been showing up most frequently. So chronic stress is the big one. Like Bailey mentioned, many of our frontline community members are navigating chronic stress from the challenges of living near polluting facilities. That's the noise pollution, the light pollution, the strong odors, the regular alerts, or not the regular alerts when you know they should be happening, the air quality concerns, shelter in place orders. It is a constant battle. And then marrying that in with safety concerns, both physical and psychological. Within our movement, just like we mentioned earlier, we have had members navigate harassment from industry officials and concerns for their vulnerable loved ones due to heightened healthcare risks, but also the intimidation of the industry and the chronic fear of another industry disaster. It's also common for members to seek support after becoming newly disabled due to a diagnosis that occurred as a result of living and working near the polluting facility. And weaving in with that are the workplace harms. For those working for environmental and climate nonprofits, many navigate workplace hazards such as compassion fatigue, moral distress, burnout, and vicarious trauma, in addition to the economic stressors due to low salaries across the field. Moving right along with that, with equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging concepts. Like many movements, there can be tension between the members individually due to competing organizational goals and insecure funding revenues, now more than ever, but we'll get there. There's also this need to confront and mend the historical and current harms between organizations and grassroots groups and community members. Unresolved harm can lead to exposure to the microaggressions, acute discrimination, lack of feeling of belonging within the movement. And while we are actively working towards addressing these within our coalition spaces, We know members have expressed the need for additional support structures, and we always will, and now more than ever, what is going on in our world. Trauma. Our members are frontline responders to industry disasters, and as such, you're exposed to high levels of trauma. As a movement, we have navigated significant illness and loss of life, intermixing that grief and trauma. And then, like we mentioned earlier, but not feeling like we have the space a lot of time to even start processing that grief, because we feel if we stop to grieve, we have stopped, and that is going to give the industry the foothold to get ahead. So we're always plowing ahead and trying to make sure that we don't dissociate from the work while not letting it overtake us. I just want to highlight that in addition to what I mentioned above was mentioned in both the 2023 and 2025 survey results, but 2025 also highlighted a few new things. Even more increasing financial instability and stress due to overall project funding cuts to healthcare and other public programs that were already barely supplementing the meager funding for environmental work compared to other nonprofit funding streams. And then to also constantly be told now by, at least here in the United States and everywhere, that your work is sometimes considered to be domestic terrorism when all you're trying to do is make sure people aren't getting cancer from an industry or near their homes and their water sources and their food sources. So it really is a little bit of a mind bleep when it goes on with that. And then finally, guilt for feeling like you're never doing enough. We feel this so much in our nonprofit work and our social work, our climate psychology work. We never feel like we're doing enough. The guilt over the fear of centering your situation over somebody else's as well, even though we know that everybody's struggle and situation has equal footing. It's more of what we do with that timing. And then we're also dealing ever increasing with survivor guilt, feeling guilty that you survived the disaster while somebody else didn't, whether they're no longer with us or they are irreparably changed because of what has happened to something that could have been easily prevented. So, but alas, don't worry, we will ever onward, ever forward. And Bailey is going to walk us through next what we've created as a result of these survey results and member discussions so that we remain committed to the immediate and long-term needs of our coalition. So thank you, Bailey, whenever you're ready.
So we still find that folks look for individual support. And, sometimes there is that need for to be seen and heard outside of the movement, especially if you want to be perceived as, confident and reliable. There are still sometimes those narratives around, I don't want to express how this work is impacting me because I want to be perceived as like steady and trustworthy. And that I think is changing a lot over time as we spend more time dedicated to this in our movement and in our coalition. But we still do individual care navigation, whether that's linking folks with outside therapists. And in particular, we've started a movement-friendly therapist directory. And so in that directory, it's small. I hope it continues to grow. Maybe some of y'all will join it. But we do individual conversations. And so we check that folks are interested, that they're looking to have referrals from our community, but then we also sit down and have conversations, usually over the phone, about what is it really like to be in this movement, what are the common stressors, what we saw, like what Robin covered, and then some considerations about what folks need, especially in terms of, disability adjustment, and safety planning and that kind of support. And so we do still do individual care navigation, and movement-friendly therapist directory continues to grow. And then we have a collective care space that has ebbed and flowed over times. I think a lot of times our first response is support groups. I'm a support group girly. I was really supported through that model. But when we live in such a high action, high pace, chronic stress from our industries, sometimes the peer support group space hasn't really met people's needs where they are when they feel like they can't take time away from work to participate. And so that's constantly ebbing and flowing with our People Power Coalition to make sure that it's a space that's meeting folks' needs so that they can be heard, validated, together to rest. And then it's also sounding like from our group that we're really looking on like wanting to learn skills from each other and then practice those skills together for caring for ourselves. So there is still that, individual level And then we're working on shifting from, that self-care space to that collective care, and movement care. And so we're very excited that we have funded a peer support pilot program. And so we'll have peer supporters that are going to receive additional training and funding to be able to provide that direct one-on-one support from somebody who gets it in a non-clinical way. Really, especially for our folks who don't feel comfortable in behavioral health landscapes or have felt invalidated within mental health care experiences, to be able to have that peer support of somebody who gets it, and then also build on the capacity and that natural helper inclination within our movement of folks who want more skills and language around suicide prevention, around mental health support, and being able to be there for each other. And so we're very excited that that was funded. And then we're also working on what does it look like when we gather and we're in community together, because we are spread out across a large region. What does it look like when we come together and have that quality time? And Robin's going to talk more about what that looked like, felt like, to be able to like move from just like organizing retreats where they're really all work to organizing retreats where we really care for each other to continue to do the work, and then have mutual aid to support the financial stress that we're experiencing and the job insecurity that we see folks experiencing.
Absolutely. Thank you. So like Bailey mentioned, the peer support pilot program, and with our POCO convening, right now we have had an annual convening. I don't think we've had one every year. My apologies. I only joined in 2019, but for the past few years have gone into our natural spaces, or we have shown that they are natural spaces that have been man-made as such, like Tigard State Lake Park, and that was purposely chosen because it is this year because it's such a wildly beautiful place, but it's also rich with a little bit of conflict, because, and little, I'm saying understated, because the lake is created by dam systems which have affected the local ecology, but our members have found these to be so deeply restorative, because even though we can't get away from the work, in the sense it's like we're all, as activists, you always feel like you're on, it's one of the hardest places to ever try and compartmentalize, but to slow down and have that space where we focus on our collective care while we talk about the work without talking about what we're going to do afterwards with this convening. It is not meant to be a networking or a conference. It is a true convening to see where we are, where we've been, where we're going, without saying like, here are our goals and our next steps for our organizations. And this year, everybody is so grateful for it, but to watch the power in people in tears of saying, I've never been in a space where I'm allowed to be and I'm allowed to process, just shows even more how we will ferociously go after as much funding as possible to have as many convenings where people know that they are in a safe space to do collective care work at their pace, and what we can do forward and give their skills. And then also through the mutual aid group, where we constantly are networking within our region and beyond with people who are affected by natural and man-made disasters, to supply mutual aid and funds to help them through the work. All righty, and here are our next steps.
Yeah, I know the event is ending and we've gone over. So if folks are heading out, thank you for letting us close you out today. We really appreciate it. And if you'd like to learn more about, our evolution and trying to support and better build care in our community, we'd love for you to connect with myself and Robin and our coalition to learn more about that. And then I also really want to recommend this reading, Pipelines and Power. I feel like it was, a really it's in our region, it's in West Virginia, and it's just a really powerful study on like, what does it really look like when you do everything right, when you organize, when they say action is the antidote to despair, and then the government still lets harm occur in your community, even though it's very well documented and you did everything you should. It really takes a toll on people, and that's what we're looking like and navigating every day, though we have lots of wins too. And so I just can't recommend that study enough. And if you want to support our work, especially if you're in our region and you get the extraction and the experience in our region, we'd love to connect to see maybe you want to come to one of our future convenings and offer that collective care space, or some kind of care for our community, and we'd love to welcome more folks in to be a part of that. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you both for really closing us out today for your power. This was a really powerful session. It is sort of reminding me that as social workers, as activists, as organizers, as academics, whatever space or place you occupy in the world, we have to come back to that fundamental value of really meeting people where they're at. And I think that you've just this discussion at the end of the day here really sort of highlighted that and brought that all together for us. So thank you for your work in this vein and thank you to all our participants today. Thank you to all of our presenters. When we first envisioned this space back in 2020, as we mentioned, our goal was to create a home for some of the urgent conversations and feelings, and to bring community together to sort of bridge that gap from policy and research to the lived reality. So today was really incredibly inspirational to hear from such a array of voices. Right? We've heard from social workers and academics and researchers and community organizers and clinicians from around the world. And seeing and bringing a global community of change makers together like this really reminds us that sort of our collective resolve is our greatest asset. And those varied perspectives are going to be our ammunition, so to speak. So many insights that were shared today. Thank you for your presence, your passion, your commitment to the work, everybody in the room. If this was the first time you'd experienced something like this, learning about ecological justice and social work, yay, you've been indoctrinated. You'll never forget it, hopefully. And we look forward to hearing how these sort of seeds of change that we've talked about over the years get planted for each and every one of you. So keep an eye on the resources that we've shared with you all. Please reach out to us. Let's stay connected and grounded, and continue to move forward. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Erin, please keep the room open, but thank you so much, everyone. Take
Thank
care.
you for joining us, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.